A prisoner stands in a small courtyard. The warden announces a sentence. He will be hanged next week on a weekday at noon. But there is a condition. The execution will be a surprise. The prisoner will not know the day until the hangman knocks on his cell door. He is returned to his cell, chains clinking softly against the stone floor. 7 days lie ahead. Each day, the same sunlight, the same clock, the same fear disguised as calm. But the mind cannot rest. Logic begins its slow unraveling. The prisoner starts to reason. If the execution is to be a surprise, it cannot happen on Friday. Because if he survives until Thursday night, then only Friday remains, and the hanging would no longer be unexpected. So Friday is impossible. He feels a sense of relief. One day removed from the list. But soon the reasoning spreads. If Friday is impossible, then Thursday also becomes impossible. Because if he survives until Wednesday night, he will know the hanging must come on Thursday, destroying the element of surprise again. And by the same logic, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, all fall away one by one. According to reason, the hanging cannot happen at all. And yet, the warden's words echo. The execution will happen next week. The week begins. Monday passes. The prisoner waits, his heart calm, convinced the logic is sound. No one comes. Tuesday arrives. The same silence. He begins to smile. The paradox comforts him. By Wednesday morning, he is almost at peace, certain that his reasoning has conquered fate. He believes that the threat is an illusion, that words cannot bind reality. Then, just as the noon bell begins to toll, footsteps approach his cell. Keys rattle. The door opens. The hangman stands there, rope in hand. The prisoner's face turns pale. He realizes he is surprised. The paradox completes itself in that instant. His prediction destroyed the surprise in theory, but not in life. By expecting the unexpected, he made himself vulnerable to it. The logic that promised safety betrayed him. The paradox of the unexpected hanging stands fulfilled. At its heart, the paradox reveals a collision between knowledge and experience. Logic assumes a perfect world, one where reasoning shapes reality. But the real world resists that control. The prisoner's backward reasoning tries to eliminate uncertainty. He wants certainty, even in death. Yet the very rule that defines the situation, that the event must be unexpected, refuses to obey logical deduction. The paradox arises because knowledge changes the outcome it tries to predict. In trying to foresee the hanging, the prisoner alters his own state of mind. The very act of thinking collapses the logic that sustains the prediction. It is not a failure of reasoning, it is a limit of reasoning itself. Human knowledge bends under the weight of self-reference. You cannot predict a surprise, because prediction erases surprise. And if you accept that you cannot predict it, surprise returns. The paradox echoes beyond the prison walls. It speaks to the tension between power and knowledge. When an authority declares both certainty and uncertainty, truth itself becomes unstable. Governments, systems, even markets often function through this paradox. We are told what will happen, yet the moment we fully believe it, reality shifts. Surprise is not only psychological, it is structural. In philosophy, the unexpected hanging mirrors the limits of human understanding. We live inside loops of expectation and disappointment, prediction and confusion. Our logic builds cages around the unknown, but the unknown keeps slipping through the bars. Even in daily life, the paradox unfolds quietly. You prepare for what you fear, and still it catches you off guard. You expect disappointment and feel relief instead. The mind moves between certainty and doubt, never resting, always constructing its own trap. It is a reflection of consciousness itself, aware, analytical, endlessly recursive. The paradox reminds us that control is fragile, that knowledge has edges we cannot cross. There is no solution, only understanding. To solve the paradox is to destroy its mystery, but the mystery is its meaning. The prisoner's fate is tragic not because he dies, but because he believes reason alone can master uncertainty. The true lesson lies in surrender, accepting that some truths remain outside logic's reach. In every prediction, there hides a contradiction. In every certainty, an unknown. And in every mind, a small courtyard where reason meets surprise. To live with that awareness is not defeat, it is wisdom. Because understanding the limits of logic is the beginning of humility. And humility is the beginning of freedom. The paradox of the unexpected hanging is not about punishment or justice. It is about the human need to know, and the quiet terror of not knowing. It teaches that some answers cannot be predicted without changing the question itself. Knowledge bends in on itself like a mirror. And sometimes, when we look too deeply, the reflection looks back and smiles. So perhaps the lesson is this. To expect the unexpected is to live in awareness, not fear. To reason about mystery is human. To accept it is wise. And somewhere between logic and life, between prediction and surprise, we find the quiet truth that not everything must be understood to be real. Imagine a hotel that stretches forever. A grand hallway of endless doors, each marked with a number that never stops increasing. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, all the way to infinity. Every room is occupied. Every guest is settled in for the night. A weary traveler arrives at the front desk, asking for a room. The clerk looks up, calm, unshaken. The sign behind him still reads no vacancy. And yet, he smiles and says there will be no problem finding space. The traveler is puzzled. The hotel is full. Every room has someone in it. Still, the clerk lifts the register and begins to rearrange infinity. Here begins the paradox. A hotel that is full, and yet can take in more guests. How can something be both complete and expandable? The mind resists the idea. Full means full. Complete means closed. But infinity does not obey such boundaries. In Hilbert's hotel, logic bends quietly, and mathematics reveals its hidden strangeness. The clerk calls every guest and gives a simple instruction. Move from your room number N to room number N+1. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 3. And so on, without end. Now, room 1 is empty. The new traveler steps inside, and the hotel, though full a moment ago, has accepted one more guest. The traveler cannot believe it. He asks, what if a bus arrives, carrying an infinite number of new guests? The clerk does not panic. He smiles again, as though infinity were an old friend. He instructs every current guest to move from room number N to room number 2N. Each guest doubles their room number. Room 1 goes to 2, room 2 to 4, room 3 to 6. Now, every even-numbered room is filled. Every odd-numbered room, 1, 3, 5, 7, stands empty. And there are infinitely many of those. An entire infinity of new guests steps inside, each finding their own room, each feeling at home. A full hotel becomes fuller. A space already infinite expands effortlessly to make room for more. Nothing is lost, and yet something impossible has occurred. The mind trembles at this, because infinity is not a number. It is an idea that stretches beyond all human comprehension. In the infinite hotel, the rules of arithmetic turn into poetry, and the boundary between logic and imagination disappears. Hilbert's hotel is a metaphor for the strange nature of infinity. In ordinary life, when something is full, no more can be added. But infinity is not ordinary. Mathematically, infinity does not behave like a quantity. It behaves like a process without end. If you add 1 to infinity, it remains infinity. If you double it, it is still infinity. Infinity can contain infinity within itself, and yet remain unchanged. This is not magic. It is the quiet logic of the infinite. It shows that our everyday understanding of space, time, and number breaks down when faced with endlessness. In Hilbert's hotel, infinity becomes visible. It invites us to step inside and experience the impossible, not through feeling, but through thought. The paradox does not destroy reason. It expands it. The infinite hotel paradox does more than challenge mathematics. It mirrors how the human mind deals with the boundless. In philosophy, it asks, can the universe itself be infinite? If the cosmos has no edge, could there still be room for more stars, more galaxies, more being? Or does infinity only exist in the language of thought, not in the structure of reality? In theology, some see Hilbert's hotel as a quiet metaphor for the divine, something that is full yet ever open, complete yet welcoming. In cosmology, it raises questions about space expanding without limit, about time that never truly ends. And in daily life, the paradox becomes a reflection of the mind itself. We are all inhabitants of a mental hotel with infinite corridors. Our thoughts move from one room to another, endlessly making space for more ideas. No matter how much we learn, the rooms ahead remain uncountable. Infinity is not distant. It lives in every question that cannot be finished, in every dream that opens into another. Hilbert's hotel cannot be solved in the sense of being closed. There is no final key, no last room. It exists to remind us of the difference between the finite and the infinite. Understanding this paradox means accepting that reason has its limits, but curiosity does not. Infinity humbles logic. It teaches that expansion does not always mean growth in space. It can be growth in understanding. The lesson of the infinite hotel is not about mathematics alone. It is about learning to think without walls. When the mind confronts the endless, it realizes that every conclusion is also a doorway. Every final thought opens into another question. We cannot finish counting the rooms. We cannot finish exploring the corridors of truth. But we can walk them, knowing that the journey itself is the meaning. Hilbert's hotel stands forever, a symbol of the infinite nature of thought. It tells us that fullness is not the end of possibility. It shows that something can be complete and yet still open to more. The paradox whispers that the universe itself might work in this way, whole, yet expanding, eternal, yet alive. It reminds us that human understanding, though limited, can still touch infinity through imagination. To contemplate the infinite is to look beyond the horizon of reason. It is to see that every answer we find leads to a greater question waiting quietly beyond it. And so the infinite hotel remains open. Its corridors stretch endlessly through the mind, each door leading to another mystery. Somewhere down that hallway, another traveler arrives, asking for a room. And the clerk, untroubled, simply nods. There is always space for one more. A father and his child stand by a wide, slow-moving river. The water is dark, reflecting the sky like a mirror with secrets. In one terrible instant, a crocodile rises from below and seizes the child. The father shouts, helpless, reaching out toward the creature. But instead of vanishing into the current, the crocodile speaks with quiet authority. It offers a bargain. If the father can predict correctly whether the child will be returned or not, the crocodile will act according to that prediction. A strange silence follows. The river flows. The father thinks. The father realizes the game is not about strength but reason. If he predicts the crocodile will return the child, and the crocodile does, the prediction is true and the agreement is honored. If the crocodile does not return the child, the prediction is false, and the crocodile breaks its word. But if the father predicts that the crocodile will not return the child, the logic folds inward. If the crocodile keeps the child, the prediction is true, but that would mean the crocodile must return the child to honor the rule. Yet if the crocodile returns the child, the prediction becomes false, and the crocodile should have kept the child instead. Each possibility cancels itself. The moment the father opens his mouth, he steps into a trap where truth and falsehood twist together. The paradox begins. The father faces two paths, both leading nowhere. He can predict return or no return, but in either case, the crocodile holds the power of contradiction. If he says the child will be returned, logic seems safe, but the crocodile can simply refuse, claiming the prediction was wrong. If he says the child will not be returned, the logic collapses under its own rules, forcing the crocodile to both return and not return the child at once. The father's words decide nothing. The act of prediction itself becomes meaningless. The crocodile has not asked for truth, it has asked for a statement that destroys itself. He looks into the still eyes of the creature and realizes the paradox is not about the child. It is about the nature of promises, of reasoning, of power hidden beneath words. The river waits for an answer. The Crocodile Paradox is an ancient riddle about self-reference and contradiction. It reveals how logic can become trapped when it tries to predict its own outcome. The crocodile's rule depends on the father's statement, but the father's statement depends on what the crocodile will do. Each one defines the other. There is no first cause, no anchor point to decide what is true. In logic, this is a loop, a self-referential cycle where prediction and action fold back upon themselves. It is similar to the liar paradox, a sentence that says it is false, and therefore cannot be either true or false without contradicting itself. The crocodile paradox adds emotion and consequence to that structure. It ties truth to morality, words to life. A father's reasoning becomes a symbol of how fragile logic becomes when reality demands both justice and consistency. The paradox extends far beyond the riverbank. It mirrors the human struggle with promises, contracts, and truth. When we bind ourselves to our own words, we create loops of obligation. Politicians, judges, and leaders speak promises that become paradoxical when outcomes contradict intentions. A declaration of truth can become its own prison. The crocodile's game also reflects how power manipulates language. By setting the rule, the creature controls the frame of reason itself. The father can only respond within the logic the crocodile designed. His freedom exists only inside the paradox. In this way, the story becomes a mirror of society. Those who control the terms of truth often need not act. They only need to define the boundaries within which others must think. And when those boundaries are circular, every answer becomes meaningless. The paradox also touches philosophy's deepest question. Can truth exist independently of the conditions that define it? If a promise is bound to its own prediction, is it still a promise, or just a performance of reason? Hilbert's infinity shows us that numbers can stretch beyond limit. The crocodile shows us that logic itself can collapse into silence. There is no solution that saves the child through logic alone. Every prediction becomes its opposite. The paradox does not exist to be solved, it exists to be seen. The lesson lies in the recognition that truth, when turned inward, devours itself. Reason cannot escape the loops it creates when it tries to predict itself perfectly. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to stop asking for certainty. If the father had refused to play, the paradox would have dissolved. But by entering the game, he accepted the rule that reason must defeat reason. That is the quiet tragedy of the crocodile paradox. It shows that rationality has limits, and those limits are drawn by the very words we trust to explain the world. To understand it is to accept that some situations do not yield to logic. They demand wisdom instead, an awareness that not every question deserves an answer bound by reason alone. The crocodile paradox whispers a warning about the power of language. Promises, predictions, and rules seem to protect truth, but they can just as easily consume it. When meaning turns back on itself, control becomes illusion. In life, we often face our own crocodiles, moments where truth and consequence cannot exist together. We try to reason through them, to predict outcomes, to be right. But sometimes, being right means stepping into a contradiction that no mind can resolve. Perhaps the real wisdom lies in silence, the refusal to enter the loop, because the paradox only lives as long as someone tries to win it. The river flows on, indifferent to logic. The crocodile waits, still impatient, a guardian of contradictions. And somewhere in that stillness, a quiet truth emerges. Not all knowledge sets us free. Some knowledge binds us to the very logic we seek to master. A society begins with a noble dream. It declares that all voices should be heard, all opinions respected, all beliefs allowed to coexist. It calls this tolerance, the foundation of peace, dialogue, and mutual respect. For a while it works. People argue, disagree, but remain civil. Ideas compete without violence. Freedom seems alive, real, untouchable. But then a darker voice enters the circle. It does not believe in tolerance. It demands the right to silence others. It preaches exclusion, hatred, domination. And the tolerant society, unsure of its limits, allows it to speak. Because to silence, it would feel like betrayal of its own principle. Thus begins the paradox of tolerance. The trap lies in the idea itself. If a society tolerates everything, even intolerance, it sows the seeds of its own destruction. Because intolerance, once allowed to grow, does not stay contained. It uses freedom to destroy freedom. It uses tolerance as a weapon against the very system that protects it. The question becomes unavoidable. Should tolerance tolerate the intolerant? If it does, it risks collapsing. If it doesn't, it risks becoming intolerant itself. A perfect contradiction, where moral purity threatens survival, and survival demands impurity. Imagine a public square where everyone is free to speak. In the beginning, it is filled with diversity: poets, teachers, believers, skeptics, dreamers. Each voice adds to the music of democracy. Then, one day, a speaker arrives who says some voices should not exist. He mocks difference, calls for exclusion, demands obedience. The crowd hesitates. Some want to silence him. Others say that would betray the principle of free expression. So he is allowed to speak. He gathers followers. He spreads doubt, fear, resentment. Gradually, those who once valued tolerance begin to feel unsafe. They retreat. Their silence leaves more room for the intolerant to speak. Soon, the square no longer belongs to everyone. It belongs to those who reject tolerance itself. The society that wanted to include all voices ends up ruled by the loudest one, the one that never believed in inclusion. Unlimited tolerance has led to the death of tolerance. The paradox stands complete. The tolerance paradox, first described by philosopher Karl Popper, is a warning about moral boundaries. Tolerance is not weakness, but it cannot exist without defense. If it refuses to resist what threatens it, it destroys itself. The paradox arises because tolerance, by its nature, seems unconditional. It invites disagreement, it celebrates diversity, it listens to difference. But intolerance does not listen, it only conquers. Therefore, a tolerant society must choose to remain open, but not defenseless, to permit diversity, but not destruction. This balance is fragile. Too much restriction becomes oppression. Too little restriction becomes chaos. The paradox shows that freedom requires limits. It is not enough to believe in openness. One must also protect the space where openness can survive. The paradox echoes through history. Every democracy that has fallen began with tolerance that refused to draw boundaries. Empires have collapsed not because they were weak, but because they allowed those who despise freedom to use freedom for control. In politics, the paradox manifests when hate speech is defended as free speech, when lies are treated as equal to truth, when cruelty hides behind the mask of fairness. In philosophy, it mirrors the tension between ethics and survival, between doing what is right and doing what is necessary. In personal life, it reveals how kindness, without boundaries, becomes exploitation. A parent who tolerates cruelty in the name of patience, a friend who accepts betrayal in the name of forgiveness, a leader who allows injustice in the name of neutrality, each becomes part of the same paradox. Unlimited tolerance turns virtue into surrender. Power, meanwhile, thrives on this contradiction. Those who understand the paradox can manipulate it, claiming oppression when stopped and dominance when allowed. The intolerant demand tolerance only until they no longer need it. Then they destroy it. There is no perfect solution, only understanding. The paradox cannot be escaped, but it can be recognized. True tolerance does not mean allowing everything. It means defending the conditions that make tolerance possible. It is not about silencing opinions. It is about refusing to let violence masquerade as dialogue. A tolerant society must sometimes act intolerantly toward intolerance. Not out of hatred, but out of preservation. Not to destroy, but to protect what makes freedom real. The lesson is not to abandon tolerance, but to strengthen it with discernment. To know when openness becomes self-destruction. To know when patience becomes complicity. In the end, the survival of tolerance depends not on how wide it opens its doors, but on how carefully it guards the threshold. The tolerance paradox is not just a riddle of logic, it is a warning for every generation. A society that refuses to draw lines will be erased by those who do. Freedom must learn to defend itself, or it will not last. The moral is quiet but sharp. Peace requires strength. Openness requires vigilance. Compassion requires courage. Tolerance is not passive acceptance. It is an active choice to protect the space where difference can live without fear. And so the paradox remains, not as a flaw, but as a reminder. Every principle, taken to its extreme, becomes its opposite. Even virtue must know where to stop. A flame that burns without limit consumes its own light. And a society that tolerates everything, even intolerance, will one day find itself unable to tolerate it all. Imagine a ship sailing across the sea. Its name is Theseus, proud and ancient, carrying memories of 1,000 journeys. Winds carve its sails, salt stains its decks, and time begins to erode its wooden frame. Piece by piece, the crew replaces what is worn away. A plank one week, a mast the next. Years pass. Every nail, every rope, every board has been replaced. Not a single part of the original ship remains. And yet, it still sails. The same name on its hull, the same captain at its helm. But a question lingers quietly in the waves. If nothing of the original remains, is it still the same ship? Here lies the paradox. The ship of Theseus forces us to confront the tension between identity and change. If you replace every part of an object, does its essence remain? At what point does transformation become replacement? At what point does continuity break? If we say the ship remains the same, we deny the reality of its change. If we say it has become new, we lose its history, its name, its soul. The paradox traps us between two truths that cannot coexist. Change is inevitable. Identity demands permanence. How can both be true? Imagine the story does not end there. The shipwrights who remove the old planks keep them, storing them carefully in a dry dock. Over the years, they reassemble the original pieces into a second ship. Now, two vessels float side by side in the harbor. One made of new materials, carrying the name and legacy of Theseus. The other built from the original wood, silent and familiar. Which is the true ship of Theseus? The one that continued its journey through constant renewal, or the one restored from the past? Both have claims. Both can tell the same story. The paradox deepens because the question has no single answer. Identity, it seems, is not a matter of material, but of meaning. The ship that sails believes it is Theseus. The ship rebuilt from memory believes the same. Perhaps both are right, or neither is. The ship of Theseus paradox exposes a crack in our understanding of identity. It shows that what we call the same may depend more on continuity of purpose than on sameness of substance. In philosophy, it asks whether objects, and even people, have a fixed essence. If the parts that make you who you are change constantly, are you still the same being? Every cell in the human body is replaced over time. Memories fade, beliefs evolve, habits dissolve. The child you once were is gone, yet somehow you remain. So what is identity? Is it the body, the memory, the pattern, or the consciousness that observes the change? Perhaps identity is not an object, but a story, a thread that weaves through time, holding form through motion. The paradox tells us that to exist is to change, and yet to change is to risk losing oneself. The ship of Theseus is not only about wood and water, it is about everything that endures through transformation. Nations rebuild themselves, laws shift, cultures evolve. Yet they cling to their names, their flags, their myths of continuity. Is a country that changes completely still the same one that was founded centuries ago? Or is it a new vessel wearing the old name? Technology mirrors the paradox too. A computer is upgraded, replaced, copied into newer machines. A human mind uploads its memories into code. If the data survives, but the body does not, who continues? Even relationships follow this rhythm. People change, slowly and perceptibly. Friends drift, lovers evolve, families rebuild themselves after loss. The bonds that survive are not made of the same pieces they once were, but of the persistence of care, the same pattern of meaning in different forms. Power, too, hides in this paradox. Those in control claim continuity as legitimacy. They say the system endures, even when everything within it has changed. They call it tradition, history, identity. But sometimes, what remains is only the name, an illusion of permanence floating on shifting water. There is no single solution to the ship of Theseus. It cannot be solved because it reflects the nature of being itself. We are all ships of Theseus, rebuilt over years, redefined by time. Every breath, every thought, every loss replaces a piece of who we were. And yet, through all those changes, something endures. Maybe it is memory. Maybe it is the story we tell ourselves. Maybe it is the awareness that watches change but remains untouched by it. Understanding this paradox does not mean fixing it. It means learning to live within it. To accept that identity is fluid, and that change does not always erase continuity. The challenge is not to stay the same, but to remain true to the pattern that holds meaning through the motion. The ship of Theseus sails not because it resists change, but because it embraces it. Each new plank honors the journey of the old. Each repair is both loss and renewal. To be alive is to be rebuilt endlessly. To be conscious is to remember that process and call it self. The ship of Theseus whispers a quiet truth. Identity is not a collection of parts. It is the continuity of becoming. You are not what you were yesterday, and yet you carry every version of yourself within you. The same way a ship becomes whole through motion, a person becomes real through change. The question, "Are you still you?" does not demand an answer, it invites reflection. Perhaps the true Theseus is not the wood or the sails, but the voyage itself. Not the body or the mind, but the journey of becoming. So imagine again that ship on the horizon. Winds change, waves rise, and the vessel keeps moving forward. Every part replaced, every memory rewritten. Yet the journey continues, steady and alive. That is the secret the paradox leaves behind. You are not the sum of your pieces, you are the path that connects them. And as long as you keep sailing, you are still you. Imagine you have built a time machine. It hums quietly in the corner, waiting for your decision. You step inside, setting the date long before you were born. A time when your grandfather was young, before your parents ever existed. You arrive, hidden in the folds of history, watching him live his ordinary life. Then, an idea begins to grow, a question that feels dangerous to even think. What would happen if you changed something here? What if, by choice or accident, your grandfather never meets your grandmother? If that happens, your parent would never be born. And without them, you would never exist. Yet here you are, standing in the past, breathing, thinking, choosing. A living contradiction. The grandfather paradox has begun. This paradox traps you in a loop of cause and effect that cannot hold both ends at once. If you change the past and erase your own existence, then who traveled back in time to make the change? But if you do not exist, then no one altered the past, and your grandfather lives on, restoring the timeline. Which means you exist again, and can travel back once more. The logic begins to spin like a wheel that never stops turning. Each possible outcome cancels itself out. Each correction creates another contradiction. You cannot change the past without changing the conditions that allowed you to exist. You cannot exist to change the past unless it remains unchanged. The paradox consumes both cause and consequence. It's not a simple puzzle. It's a mirror reflecting the limits of reason itself. Imagine this as a story. You step out of the time machine and walk through a small village, decades before your own time. You see your grandfather, young, careless, alive. You try to speak with him, perhaps even warn him about his future. But then, a single action, a word, a gesture, ripples outward. Maybe you stop him from taking a train he was meant to board. Maybe you prevent an accident. Maybe you accidentally cause one. In one branch of the timeline, your interference saves him, and life continues. In another, it destroys the chain that leads to your birth. In that moment, time fractures. You begin to fade, like ink dissolving in water. But before you vanish completely, you find yourself back in the machine, the loop resetting. Over and over, you try to find a version that makes sense. One where you can change the past, but still exist to remember it. No matter what you do, the paradox persists. It is not a problem of machinery or physics. It is a problem of meaning. You cannot exist both as the cause and the consequence of your own erasure. The universe does not know how to write that equation. At its core, the grandfather paradox asks one thing. Can time tolerate contradiction? If cause and effect can be reversed, if consequences can undo their own origins, then logic collapses. It would mean a reality that erases itself while it exists. Philosophically, it touches the nature of identity and causation. To change the past would mean rewriting the sequence that defines who you are. But identity, like time, relies on continuity. In physics, some suggest alternate timelines, each decision creating a new branch of reality. In that view, if you altered the past, you would not erase yourself, but create another version of history where you never existed. Two worlds side by side, one where you are and one where you never were. But even then, the question remains, who are you in that second world? A visitor without origin, a ghost from a timeline that no longer connects. The paradox reveals how fragile our understanding of time truly is. We imagine time as a line, clean and straight. But perhaps it is a web, threads crossing, looping, folding back upon themselves. The grandfather paradox is the moment when that web twists into a knot no logic can untangle. Beyond the fantasy of time travel, the grandfather paradox mirrors something deeply human. We all wish to rewrite the past, to undo mistakes, to fix what went wrong, to meet the person we might have been if we had chosen differently. But every change erases part of the path that led us here. Every correction removes a cause that shaped us. Just like the paradox, Our longing to change the past contains the seed of our own undoing. History itself reflects this tension. Nations revise their pasts, rewriting narratives to justify their present. But by erasing the darkness, they lose the lessons that once gave them meaning. Even personal memory works this way. We retell our stories until we believe them. But in reshaping the past, we change the person remembering it. Power thrives on this paradox too. Those who control the story of yesterday control the world of today. By editing the past, they define identity, legitimacy, destiny. The paradox warns us, tampering with origins may destroy what they were meant to preserve. The grandfather paradox is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be understood. It teaches us that time may not be a playground for correction, but a fabric of interdependence. Every cause we touch ripples into countless consequences. To undo the past would be to undo the chain of becoming itself. Perhaps the only real power we have is not to change what was, but to understand it, to see how it made us, and how it continues to shape what we choose next. The paradox reminds us that identity is born of continuity, that even regret has a purpose. Without it, we would not search for wisdom. Time travel may remain fiction, but reflection, the act of revisiting our own past through memory, is the closest thing we have. And unlike the paradox, it does not destroy what it touches. It transforms it through understanding. Imagine you stand again before the time machine. Your hand rests on the lever. You could go back. You could try again. But you hesitate. Because now, you understand that the past is not a mistake to erase, but a lesson to inherit. The paradox was never about time. It was about acceptance. You are both the result of every flaw and the hope of every correction. The paradox dissolves when you stop trying to undo your origin. So you step away from the machine. The world remains as it is, imperfect, unchangeable, alive. You breathe and realize that the only direction that truly matters is forward. The grandfather paradox leaves you with a quiet truth. You cannot change the past, but the past can still change you. And in that, time finds its peace. Imagine a person speaking in a quiet room. They say something simple, short, but strange. They claim to be lying. A sentence forms, then hovers in the air. The words are clear, yet their meaning is impossible to hold. If the statement is true, then they are lying. But if they are lying, then the statement is false. And if it is false, then they are not lying, which means the statement is true again. The paradox unfolds quietly. It is not violent or loud, but it refuses resolution. The sentence traps truth and falsehood in an endless loop, spinning without release. The liar paradox is a trap built from language itself. We assume that statements have a clear truth value, true or false. Yet here, a single statement refuses that binary. The logic falters because the statement refers to itself. It is self-referential, pointing back like a mirror that distorts every reflection. Truth cannot settle because each claim immediately contradicts itself. This is a paradox of reason, not a trick of words. It forces the mind to confront the limits of consistency. We believe in clear statements, in cause and consequence, in logic as a law. But the liar paradox reveals that even logic can stumble over its own definitions. Imagine a courtroom. A witness rises and says they are lying. The judge pauses, the jury leans forward. Every mind in the room searches for a resolution. If the witness is telling the truth, then they are lying. If they are lying, then they are telling the truth. Each interpretation collapses into the other. It is as if the floor beneath the mind has disappeared. You cannot step left or right, because both directions lead to contradiction. The paradox cannot be ignored. It does not resolve with time or reflection. It exists as a loop, eternal and unyielding. Now imagine extending this idea. A network of statements, each referring to others. Every truth becomes unstable. Every falsehood threatens to invert itself. Logic itself trembles at the edges of this system. The liar paradox is simple, yet infinite in consequence. At its heart, the paradox is about self-reference. It shows the danger of statements that refer to their own truthfulness. The statement, "I am lying," cannot be strictly true or strictly false. It is neither a lie nor a truth in isolation. It exists in a liminal state, a place between categories. Philosophers and logicians have wrestled with this for centuries. Some argue it points to limitations in language. Others see it as a boundary of human reason. The paradox does not break logic. It exposes where language and logic intersect imperfectly. It forces us to recognize that not all systems can be perfectly consistent. Self-reference creates loops that resist closure. Truth is not always absolute when words point to themselves. In this simple statement, the universe of meaning bends and folds. The paradox has echoes far beyond a single sentence. In philosophy, it questions whether absolute truth is achievable. In mathematics, self-referential formulas create similar loops. In computer science, programs can enter endless loops when conditions refer to themselves. Even in everyday life, the paradox appears. A person who claims they never speak the truth creates confusion in conversation. A politician who insists on falsehoods while demanding truth forces society into contradiction. Social media amplifies these loops, where statements contradict themselves instantly and globally. Power can exploit the paradox. A leader may claim loyalty while acting against their word. The paradox destabilizes trust. Truth and falsehood are no longer tools to measure reality. They become instruments of control and chaos. The liar paradox is small, a single sentence, but it reflects a vast problem. When truth becomes unstable, reason itself must bend or break. There is no perfect solution to the liar paradox. The statement cannot be resolved without changing its structure. To solve it would be to destroy the very quality that makes it paradoxical. The lesson is understanding rather than victory. The paradox teaches that language has limits. Logic has limits. Even reason cannot encompass every possible self-reference. We learn to recognize loops, to see when contradictions are not failures but signals. Sometimes, the truth of a paradox lies not in what it declares, but in how it challenges the mind. Understanding the liar paradox allows us to approach communication, reasoning, and trust more carefully. We see the fragility of absolute claims. We see the danger of self-reference when mixed with authority. And we begin to navigate the liminal spaces between true and false. Imagine the sentence once more. It hangs in the air, both true and false, refusing to settle. The mind may feel tension, even frustration. Yet this is the point. Some questions are meant not to be solved, but to be contemplated. The liar paradox reminds us of the limits of certainty. It teaches humility in thinking. It warns that language can deceive even when we believe ourselves careful. Truth and falsehood are tools, but they are not absolute in every circumstance. We live in a world where self-reference, contradiction, and perspective shape meaning. To understand the paradox is to accept that not everything can be categorized neatly. In that acceptance, we find freedom. We learn to hold tension, to think critically, and to live with questions that have no final answer. The paradox is a mirror. It reflects not only words, but the nature of thought itself. And in gazing into it, we glimpse the delicate balance between truth, language, and reason. It does not resolve. It does not surrender. It only exists, quietly, waiting for minds willing to see it as it is. Imagine a small town, quiet and orderly. In the center stands a barber, a man of habit and precision. He has a clear rule. He shaves every man who does not shave himself, and only those men. Every day, townspeople visit him. They trust the rule. They line up, receive their shave, and leave. But one question lingers in the shadows, unspoken, until it surfaces quietly. Who shaves the barber? The question seems simple, almost polite, almost trivial. And yet, the moment you ask, logic begins to twist. The paradox becomes apparent immediately. If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he should not be shaved by the barber. But if he does not shave himself, then he must be shaved by the barber. Either way, the rule collapses. It creates a loop where no answer fits. Truth and practice collide. The barber cannot exist without violating the rule he follows. This is the trap, self-reference wrapped in ordinary life. A simple rule applied universally can become impossible when applied to itself. The Barber Paradox shows that rules are fragile when they try to contain themselves. Imagine the barber on a quiet morning. He prepares his tools, waxes the chair, sharpens the razor. A man enters, hesitant, and asks for a shave. The barber checks the rule. This man does not shave himself. He shaves him carefully, following his principle. Another man comes, and the same routine unfolds. Everything works perfectly, orderly, predictable. Then he looks into the mirror. His own face stares back. He realizes the question has no answer. If he shaves himself, the rule forbids it. If he does not, the rule demands it. Time seems to pause. The paradox becomes a quiet pressure in the room, pressing on thought. The barber cannot shave, cannot not shave. His identity and his rule collapse together. The paradox mirrors an invisible tension in reasoning. A simple principle that works for others fails when applied to itself. Logic, which appears absolute, falters under its own conditions. The Barber Paradox is a study in self-reference. It belongs to the same family as the Allais Paradox, revealing contradictions that emerge when a system refers to itself. The rule is consistent externally but inconsistent internally. It defines behavior for all others, but the subject of the rule cannot satisfy it. In essence, the paradox shows that some definitions are inherently impossible. It challenges our understanding of set theory, logic, and definitions. A set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves cannot exist without contradiction. The barber is the human analog. He is the rule applied to itself. The paradox exposes limits in our attempt to create rules that are both universal and absolute. The paradox resonates beyond a small town or a barber's shop. It mirrors challenges in law, governance, and ethics. Consider a system that defines itself by rules about its own behavior. A law that applies to all citizens, but not lawmakers, may fail. A contract that governs all parties, but its enforcer may collapse. Systems that govern themselves often face contradictions when they try to include their own authority. The paradox also applies to personal life. We impose rules on others, yet struggle when those rules apply to ourselves. A parent who insists on honesty may find the rules collide with personal temptation. A leader who preaches discipline may falter under their own standards. Power interacts with self-reference in subtle ways. Those who control rules may find themselves trapped by them. The paradox warns that authority, when applied universally, is vulnerable when the enforcer is included. The paradox cannot be solved by shaving or not shaving. No action satisfies the conditions. The barber exists as a concept, not as a practical reality. Understanding this is the key lesson. The paradox teaches caution in creating universal rules. It shows the fragility of self-reference and the limitations of consistency when applied universally. The barber reminds us that logic has edges. Some problems are unsolvable, not because of weakness or lack of effort, but because of the structure of the system itself. Recognizing paradoxes allows us to navigate complexity more wisely. It is not the resolution that matters, but the awareness that some systems contain inherent contradictions. By seeing the limits, we can design better rules, accept complexity, and avoid impossible expectations. Imagine the barber once more, standing quietly in the shop. The mirrors reflect the paradox back endlessly. No shave will resolve it. No rule can contain it. The paradox leaves a quiet truth. Universal rules are fragile when they attempt to govern themselves. Authority, consistency, and logic must account for self-reference or collapse under it. The barber is both example and warning. He teaches that some problems are not meant to be solved. Some rules are lessons in humility. And in that quiet, the paradox remains alive. A simple question about a barber leads to reflection about reasoning, systems, and human thought. The barber cannot be shaved, cannot avoid contradiction, yet his existence opens a doorway into deeper understanding. The lesson lingers. Awareness is more valuable than resolution. Some loops cannot be closed. Some questions exist to expand the mind, not to answer it. And the barber stands there, patiently, eternally, a guardian of impossible logic. Imagine walking into a shop. The shelves stretch endlessly, filled with colors, shapes, and possibilities. Every product promises satisfaction, fulfillment, a solution to some desire you didn't even realize you had. You pick one up, then hesitate. Another option catches your eye, brighter, newer, more appealing. You move from aisle to aisle, comparing, considering, questioning. The more you look, the less certain you become. This is the paradox of choice. More options should bring freedom, yet they bring doubt. More possibilities should bring satisfaction, yet they bring anxiety. The trap is subtle. We believe that having more choices increases our power, our control, our happiness. We think that with enough options, we can find the perfect solution. But human psychology is not built to navigate infinite alternatives. Every additional option increases the complexity of decision-making. Every comparison heightens doubt. Every possibility breeds regret. We become paralyzed by freedom. The very abundance that promises liberty instead binds us in hesitation and dissatisfaction. Choice becomes a burden instead of a blessing. Imagine you are selecting a new phone. 10 models, 20, 50. Each promises speed, clarity, prestige. You compare features, read reviews, calculate costs. One seems perfect, but then another emerges that is slightly better. Hours pass. The decision feels heavier with each comparison. Even after you choose, a quiet unease lingers. What if the other option was better? What if you made a mistake? Now imagine this pattern repeating across life. Choosing a career path, a partner, a city, a meal. Each decision presents a horizon of alternatives, each promising the best while offering uncertainty. Paradoxically, the more freedom we are given, the more trapped we feel. We think choice equals happiness. Instead, choice often equals stress. The mind craves clarity, yet the abundance of options ensures confusion. The paradox is grounded in psychology. Humans are not optimized for unlimited options. We suffer from decision fatigue. We fear missing out. We compare outcomes and imagine every possible regret. Choice amplifies expectations. When options are limited, satisfaction is simpler. You choose and you move forward. With limitless possibilities, every decision becomes provisional, every satisfaction partial. The paradox also reveals a tension between autonomy and overwhelm. Freedom is empowering only when bounded. Excess leads to indecision, dissatisfaction, and stress. In seeking more freedom, we sometimes find less. This is the essence of the paradox of choice. Abundance undermines fulfillment. The paradox echoes beyond the store or the dinner menu. In modern life, we are surrounded by infinite choices: careers, relationships, entertainment, information. We scroll endlessly, compare endlessly, consume endlessly. The promise of freedom becomes a weight we carry unconsciously. Society also exploits this paradox. Marketing thrives on abundance, on presenting possibilities that awaken desire and doubt. Politics manipulates options to distract and divide. Even technology, designed to empower, can overwhelm by offering too much. Philosophically, the paradox asks whether happiness is linked to choice or to contentment. If satisfaction decreases as options increase, what then defines a good life? Power, in a world of choices, may be measured not by the quantity of options, but by the ability to focus and decide wisely. Even personal life is shaped by this. A parent deciding how to raise a child, a student choosing a path, a friend navigating relationships, all face the subtle tyranny of abundant choice. The paradox reminds us that liberation can be hidden in simplicity. The paradox does not demand the elimination of choice. It requires awareness and balance. Understanding the limitations of the mind allows us to approach decisions with clarity. We can narrow options deliberately. We can prioritize values rather than endless comparison. We can accept that some decisions are provisional, and that perfection is an illusion. The lesson is that freedom is most powerful when guided, not limitless. Boundaries, constraints, and limits do not diminish autonomy, they enable satisfaction. We learn to act decisively, to commit, and to find contentment in the choice made rather than the choice imagined. Understanding the paradox allows us to live in a world of abundance without being consumed by it. Imagine the shop once more. You step inside, scanning the shelves, your mind quiet and deliberate. You limit yourself, focus on what matters, and make a choice. You feel relief, clarity, and even a quiet satisfaction. The paradox of choice whispers a subtle truth. More is not always better. Abundance can overwhelm. Freedom without guidance can become paralysis. Happiness lies not in having infinite options, but in navigating what matters with purpose and acceptance. Boundaries become liberation, focus becomes clarity, and decision becomes a path rather than a burden. The paradox does not disappear. It remains a quiet shadow in every decision, a reminder that more freedom can bring less fulfillment. Yet understanding it allows us to move forward, to choose, and to find calm in a world of endless possibility. The mind, once aware, learns to embrace choices without fear. The heart, once guided, learns to be satisfied. And the paradox becomes not a trap, but a teacher. Imagine a city looking at its numbers. Employment rates rise. Graduation rates improve. On the surface, the story is simple. Progress is happening. Now imagine looking closer at neighborhoods, at subgroups, at smaller slices of reality. A different picture emerges. In some communities, opportunities are declining. In some groups, progress is reversed. The aggregated data tells one story, the detailed data another. Numbers that seem clear suddenly confuse, mislead, and contradict. This is the essence of Simpson's paradox. The paradox lies in aggregation. When data from different groups is combined, trends can reverse. A treatment that appears effective overall may be harmful for every subgroup. A company that seems profitable overall may be losing money in every division. The trap is subtle because numbers feel objective, immutable, trustworthy. We assume that summing facts gives truth. Simpson's paradox reminds us that numbers are not immune to context, weighting, and distribution. Truth becomes conditional, fragile, and sometimes deceptive. What appears straightforward on the surface can hide contradiction beneath. Imagine a hospital comparing two treatments for a disease. Treatment A is given to many patients, treatment B to fewer. Overall, treatment B shows a higher success rate. It seems clear, B is better. But then the doctors examine subgroups. Among patients with mild conditions, treatment A succeeds more often. Among patients with severe conditions, treatment A also succeeds more often. Every subgroup favors treatment A, yet the aggregated numbers favor treatment B. How can this be? The answer lies in the distribution of patients. Treatment B was given disproportionately to healthier patients. Aggregation masks the underlying reality. This is not just about hospitals. Universities, businesses, governments all rely on aggregated numbers. Averages can mislead, totals can hide disparities, trends can invert. The paradox teaches caution, humility, and curiosity in interpreting data. Simpson's paradox arises from the mathematics of weighted averages. When subgroups differ in size or composition, combining them can distort trends. The overall average is influenced by the size and distribution of groups more than by the individual outcomes. In essence, the paradox shows that context matters. Numbers are not inherently truthful. They must be interpreted carefully. Data can illuminate, but it can also obscure. Averages can lie, trends can reverse, and the truth can hide in the details. This is why analysts speak of confounding variables. Simpson's paradox is a reminder that statistics, like logic, has boundaries. Without careful attention, conclusions drawn from numbers can be dangerously misleading. The paradox extends beyond statistics. It is a metaphor for perception and decision-making. In life, the whole can misrepresent the parts. Policies that seem fair may harm minorities. Aggregated success may hide individual suffering. Public opinion can be swayed by averages that mask extremes. Even in business, the paradox appears. A company that seems profitable overall may have failing divisions. Investors looking at aggregated data may make choices that ignore critical detail. Power exploits this effect. Leaders present simplified numbers to justify decisions. Aggregated metrics are used to shape perception, sway confidence, and obscure inequalities. The paradox is a reminder that truth is not only in measurement, but in understanding context. Philosophically, Simpson's paradox warns against complacency. Seeing is not always believing. Numbers, like words, can deceive when stripped of context. Reality is layered, complex, and often counterintuitive. There is no way to remove the paradox. It is a natural consequence of aggregation. The resolution lies in awareness. We must examine subgroups, understand distributions, and consider context. Decision-making requires looking beyond averages. It requires skepticism, curiosity, and careful analysis. It demands humility. The world is often more nuanced than a single number can convey. Simpson's paradox teaches a profound lesson. Truth is conditional. It is not enough to rely on totals. We must explore detail, investigate patterns, and question assumptions. Understanding the paradox allows us to navigate data wisely. We learn to respect complexity, recognize hidden variables, and interpret numbers with care. This insight transforms statistics from a tool of illusion into a guide to deeper understanding. Imagine the city once more. The aggregated data shows progress. The neighborhoods reveal disparities. Both are true, and both are incomplete. Simpson's paradox whispers a quiet warning. Numbers can lie if stripped of context. What seems clear may be misleading. What seems simple may be deceptive. The lesson is vigilance, reflection, and curiosity. Do not accept averages as final truth. Seek the subgroups, understand the distributions, examine the patterns. Reality often hides in the margins, not in the sums. The paradox reminds us that complexity is real. It teaches humility in judgment and care in interpretation. Numbers are powerful, but only when approached with thoughtfulness. In the end, Simpson's paradox is not a flaw of mathematics. It is a mirror for the mind. It asks us to see beyond the surface, to question, to probe, and to embrace nuance. Truth is rarely simple. It exists in detail, in context, and in the delicate balance between the parts and the whole. And in that understanding, we find clarity. Imagine standing on a stage under bright lights. 3 doors stand before you. Behind one, a prize waits, hidden. The other 2 hide only disappointment. You choose a door, trusting intuition, hoping luck favors you. The host, calm and deliberate, opens one of the remaining doors. It reveals nothing but a goat, a symbol of what might have been. Now you are offered a choice. Stick with your original selection, or switch to the other unopened door. The question is simple. The answer feels intuitive. Yet intuition lies. This is the Monty Paradox. The trap emerges in the tension between perception and probability. We assume our first choice carries equal weight as the other unopened door. We imagine a fair 50-50 split, as if chance resets. But the rules of the game are subtle. The host's actions are not random. The revealed door is chosen with knowledge, never a chance. Probability is not divided equally after the reveal. The paradox forces us to confront a counterintuitive truth. What feels right is not always optimal. Our intuition about randomness is flawed. Winning requires reasoning beyond what seems natural. Imagine choosing door number 1. Your heart races. You hope the prize is behind it. Monty opens door number 3. Goat. You are offered the option to switch to door number 2. Logic suggests hesitation. Switching feels like betrayal of your first choice. Yet probability tells another story. Initially, your chance of picking the prize was 1 in 3. 2/3 probability rests on the other doors. When Monty reveals a goat behind one of them, that entire probability collapses onto the remaining unopened door. If you switch, you inherit the 2/3 chance of winning. If you stay, you are left with only 1/3. Over repeated trials, the counterintuitive strategy emerges clearly. Switching wins far more often than sticking. The outcome defies instinct, yet it is entirely logical. This is not mere trickery. It is a lesson in probability, perception, and decision-making under uncertainty. The Monty Paradox reveals how intuition can mislead in probabilistic reasoning. Humans often assume that revealed outcomes reset the odds. We see 2 doors, assume a 50-50 chance, and ignore prior probabilities. Probability is cumulative, conditional, and sensitive to information. Monty's knowledge changes the dynamics. The reveal is not random. It provides information. The paradox is a reminder that reasoning must account for context. Decisions under uncertainty require more than gut feeling. They require understanding the structure of the system and how information shifts likelihoods. It also teaches patience and clarity. Rushing to instinct can obscure better choices. Success is often found in seeing beyond the obvious. The paradox resonates far beyond a game show. In life, we face choices with incomplete information. The initial decision rarely reflects all the factors at play. Investors encounter similar situations. Markets reveal information gradually. Adjusting decisions in response to new knowledge often outperforms clinging to initial judgments. Managers, leaders, and policymakers confront analogous dilemmas. New data appears after decisions are made. Changing course may feel risky, yet it aligns with probability and insight. The paradox also speaks to human cognition. We overvalue initial choices, underestimate conditional probability, and rely on intuition that is often misleading. Monty is a microcosm of decision-making under uncertainty, a lesson in rational adaptation. Power, whether in economics, leadership, or strategy, lies in understanding hidden probabilities. Information transforms options, and those who recognize its effect gain advantage. The paradox teaches that hesitation guided by instinct alone can be costly. The Monty Paradox does not require us to play a game show. It teaches a principle that extends to daily life. The lesson is awareness and adaptation. Information changes probability. The optimal choice is often counterintuitive. We must recognize when intuition fails, and reason must guide action. Understanding the structure of uncertainty allows better decisions. We see how new evidence shifts odds. We learn that initial commitment is not always optimal. Flexibility, reasoning, and attention to context are more powerful than blind confidence. This is the resolution, not in the game itself, but in the approach to decision-making. Imagine standing before the doors once more. You choose door number 1. Monty opens door number 3. The choice to switch feels strange, yet it is rational. The paradox whispers a quiet truth. Intuition can mislead. What feels safe may be suboptimal. What seems risky may be wise. The Monty Paradox teaches us to think probabilistically. It teaches patience, analysis, and the courage to act against instinct. It is a lesson in life, not just games. Information reshapes reality, and success often lies in embracing the counterintuitive. The doors remain closed, the prize hidden, yet the lesson is clear. Understanding trumps instinct. Observation and reason transform outcomes. And in that understanding, we gain the power to navigate uncertainty with clarity and confidence. The paradox is not a puzzle to frustrate, but a teacher to illuminate. It reminds us that probability is subtle, intuition imperfect, and insight invaluable. Imagine a quiet room, a single ticket in hand. You have bought a chance, a possibility, a sliver of hope. The lottery is simple. Numbers are drawn. One wins. Millions lose. The stakes feel real. The dream of sudden fortune hovers. Your mind entertains the impossible yet tantalizing outcome. Across the city, millions of others clutch their tickets. Each hopes, each imagines the thrill of winning. The numbers are impartial, yet human desire bends around them, shaping expectation, shaping belief. Here lies the trap. Probability is tiny. Nearly every ticket loses. Yet each individual ticket is, in principle, capable of winning. If you predict that you will win, reality almost certainly contradicts expectation. If you predict that you will lose, the prediction aligns with probability. The paradox emerges because expectation and statistical reality diverge. Your personal hope cannot alter the objective odds, yet your belief feels convincing. Logic and desire create a subtle conflict. Imagine holding a ticket numbered 472. You imagine your number being called. You envision yourself celebrating, lifting the prize. Your expectation feels natural. The draw begins. Numbers appear. One by one, your anticipation grows. But the probability remains minute. 1 in millions. Despite your vivid expectation, reality almost always contradicts it. Now imagine predicting loss. You say quietly, "This ticket will almost certainly not win." This aligns with probability. Yet, even here, a tiny chance remains, a whisper of uncertainty. The paradox is revealed. Every ticket has nearly zero probability, yet some ticket must win. Even the rational mind struggles. Expectation tells one story, probability another. The paradox exists in the space between belief and reality. Predicting your own victory is statistically absurd, yet psychologically compelling. The lottery paradox illustrates tension between probability and expectation. Statistically, each individual outcome is improbable. Collectively, one outcome is certain. The paradox emerges from aggregation versus individual prediction. A single ticket almost certainly loses, yet a winning ticket exists. This contradiction highlights the subtlety of reasoning under uncertainty. We are drawn to imagine success for ourselves, even as logic demands humility. The paradox is less about chance and more about human cognition. We see the limits of expectation. We see how perception diverges from mathematics. Our minds are inclined toward hope, yet probability remains indifferent. The paradox extends beyond lottery tickets. It appears in risk assessment, investment, and policy making. Individuals act on expectations that contradict statistical reality. Markets fluctuate because collective hope amplifies unlikely outcomes. The paradox also appears in social behavior. We assume that our contribution will succeed, even when odds are minuscule. Human ambition persists in the face of near impossibility. Power interacts with this effect. Governments, corporations, and media exploit the tension between hope and probability. Advertising and speculation encourage belief in unlikely success. The paradox shows how human expectation can be manipulated, amplified, or deferred. Philosophically, it illustrates humility and perspective. Probability governs the universe, indifferent to desire. Yet our experience is colored by hope, imagination, and expectation. The paradox asks whether understanding probability is sufficient to temper desire. The lottery paradox cannot be resolved by prediction alone. You cannot reconcile expectation with probability entirely. Yet understanding the paradox brings insight. Recognizing the odds allows informed perspective. Hope can coexist with rational assessment. We learn to act without illusion, to dream without being trapped by impossibility. The lesson is subtle. It is not that hope is wrong, but that it exists in tension with certainty. We understand that low probability does not negate experience. We accept uncertainty as intrinsic, and expectation as a guide rather than a guarantee. Understanding the paradox is empowering. It prevents despair when expectation fails. It tempers overconfidence when probability favors caution. It teaches a balance between imagination and reality. Imagine the ticket once more. You hold it lightly, aware of the odds. You imagine winning, yet recognize the improbability. You accept that statistically, loss is far more likely, yet embrace the flicker of possibility. The paradox whispers a quiet truth. Expectation and probability rarely align perfectly. Desire does not obey mathematics. Yet understanding the structure of chance allows clarity, calm, and measured hope. The lottery teaches patience, perspective, and humility. It reminds us that human cognition is drawn toward improbable outcomes. It reminds us that life's certainty is limited, while imagination remains infinite. The paradox is not a puzzle to solve, but a mirror of the mind. It reveals how hope can defy logic, how expectation can clash with reality. Yet in that tension lies insight. To navigate chance with understanding, not denial, to dream, yet measure, to participate, yet remain aware. In that space between what is likely and what is imagined, we learn to live fully. The paradox does not vanish. It teaches. It humbles. It illuminates the subtle dance between probability and expectation. Imagine holding a glass of water in your hand. It is clear, simple, essential. Without it, life falters, withers, and ends. Yet it costs almost nothing. Now imagine holding a diamond. A small, glittering stone. It dazzles, captivates, and symbolizes wealth. Yet its utility and survival is minimal. The price is astronomical. This is the paradox of value. The essential is cheap. The luxurious, often superficial, is expensive. It challenges intuition and questions the nature of worth. The trap is immediate. We assume value should correlate with necessity. Water sustains life, yet is abundant and cheap. Diamonds offer little practical use, yet command immense prices. This contradiction appears illogical. We expect scarcity to align with importance. We expect essential resources to hold the highest value. Yet the economic system and human perception diverge. The paradox forces reflection. Value is not inherent. It is perceived, contextual, and socially constructed. Imagine a desert wanderer, parched and desperate. Every drop of water is precious. Yet if she stumbles upon a diamond in the sand, its sparkle might astonish her, but it cannot quench thirst. Now consider a jeweler in a bustling city. Diamonds are rare, controlled, and desired. They signify status, commitment, and wealth. Water, ubiquitous and cheap, does not inspire awe or status. In both scenarios, value is situational. For the wanderer, water is priceless. For the urban buyer, diamonds are treasures. Economics reflects this perception. Market prices are determined not by absolute utility, but by scarcity, demand, and human desire. Water is abundant in many regions, keeping its price low. Diamonds are rare and socially exalted, driving their costs skyward. The paradox arises because intrinsic value and market value diverge. The essential may be undervalued, and the symbolic overvalued. Human behavior, psychology, and economics intersect in a way that contradicts simple logic. The paradox of value highlights the difference between utility and marginal utility. Water is essential yet plentiful. The next glass provides little additional benefit, so its market value remains low. Diamonds are non-essential, but rare. Each additional diamond increases desire, and scarcity inflates price. Value is therefore relational. It depends on context, perception, and human priorities. Necessity does not guarantee expense, and extravagance does not imply practical worth. The paradox also underscores the role of human judgment in economics. Social constructs, symbolic meaning, and scarcity shape what we are willing to pay. It teaches that markets reflect not just need, but perception, culture, and desire. The paradox extends beyond commodities. Education, knowledge, relationships, often the most essential elements of life, are undervalued or undercompensated. Luxury goods, status symbols, and trivial pursuits receive outsized attention and reward. Power and influence often amplify this effect. Control of scarcity creates demand and value. Societies may exaggerate the importance of the non-essential to enforce hierarchy or prestige. Philosophically, the paradox challenges assumptions about rationality. Human beings do not always value according to survival or necessity. We assign worth according to perception, context, and symbolic meaning. This insight extends into daily life. We make choices and investments based on what is scarce, admired, or socially meaningful, rather than purely useful. The paradox invites reflection on priorities and the alignment of value with true importance. The paradox of value cannot be resolved by simple logic. Water will remain cheap, diamonds expensive. Yet understanding the paradox brings clarity. We learn to distinguish between intrinsic and perceived value. We see how scarcity, desire, and social meaning shape markets. We recognize that human judgment often departs from objective necessity. The lesson is subtle. Understanding value requires awareness of context, scarcity, and perception. It teaches humility in assessing worth. It encourages reflection on what is truly essential and what is culturally constructed as desirable. By appreciating the paradox, we navigate consumption, investment, and decision-making with discernment. We recognize the difference between survival, symbolism, and superficiality. Imagine holding the glass of water once more. It is life-sustaining, indispensable, yet undervalued in daily life. Now hold the diamond. It captivates, symbolizes status, yet its practical worth is minimal. The paradox whispers a quiet truth. Value is not absolute. It is shaped by scarcity, perception, and human desire. Necessity does not ensure high price, and rarity does not guarantee importance. The lesson extends beyond economics. It applies to priorities, relationships, and the choices we make. Understanding the paradox cultivates awareness, discernment, and perspective. We learn to honor the essential, recognize symbolic value, and question superficial allure. We see the invisible hand of perception shaping our world. And in that understanding, we approach life with clarity, balance, and insight. The paradox of value remains unresolved, yet it illuminates the delicate interplay between need, scarcity, and human judgment. It teaches patience, reflection, and the wisdom to discern true worth amid illusion and convention. Imagine a family sitting around the dinner table. A suggestion arises: a trip to a distant town. It seems like a good idea on the surface. Everyone nods, agrees politely. Hours later, they arrive, exhausted and frustrated. No one truly wanted the trip, yet all went along. This is the Abilene Paradox. A decision emerges not from desire, but from perceived agreement, a collective action that satisfies no one individually. The stakes may seem small, but the pattern repeats in life, in work, and in society. Group consensus can override personal judgment, creating outcomes that nobody really wants. The trap is subtle. Individuals misinterpret the preferences of others. They act not on their own desires, but on assumptions about group expectations. Each person seeks to avoid conflict or disapproval. The paradox grows as silence is mistaken for agreement. The group moves forward, thinking it is unified, yet it is divided in reality. Decision-making becomes a theater of miscommunication. Each participant consents to what they believe others want, not what they truly desire. The result is an action that satisfies no one. Imagine a team in a corporate meeting. A project proposal is presented. Nobody feels confident about its merits, but each nods, unwilling to dissent. The project moves forward. Months later, resources are wasted, morale is low, and frustration runs high. Everyone secretly disagrees, yet no one spoke up. The paradox arises from the contrast between individual preference and group behavior. Collective decisions appear rational, yet they contradict personal judgment. Consensus, without communication and honesty, becomes a trap. The dynamics are universal. Families, boards, committees, and societies fall into similar patterns. A minor assumption, unspoken, can steer a group in an unwanted direction. Politeness, fear, or desire to conform overrides honesty. The group acts as a single body, yet no part of it truly consents. The Abilene Paradox illustrates the conflict between social perception and individual preference. People assume their desires are at odds with the group. They suppress objections to avoid disruption or judgment. Ironically, the group often shares the same private doubts. If everyone spoke their mind, the unwanted decision would never occur. Instead, misperception amplifies conformity, creating a chain of silent agreement. The paradox highlights the dangers of assuming knowledge of others' intentions. It shows how consensus can emerge from miscommunication rather than shared desire. It is a mirror for the human tendency to prioritize harmony over honesty, conformity over judgment. The paradox is not limited to trivial decisions. It shapes politics, organizational life, and social movements. Governments may adopt policies they internally doubt, fearing dissent. Corporations may pursue strategies no executive truly supports. Social groups may follow trends nobody genuinely endorses. Power magnifies the effect. Authority figures, silent hierarchies, and unspoken norms can all intensify the paradox. People act to align with perceived expectation rather than reality. The result is collective action that satisfies nobody, wastes resources, and breeds frustration. Philosophically, the paradox asks us to examine conformity and communication. It forces reflection on the nature of agreement, trust, and honesty. It reminds us that silence and assumption can be more dangerous than disagreement. The Abilene Paradox cannot be eliminated by rigid rules. It is a consequence of human social dynamics. Yet understanding it allows prevention. The key is communication. Individuals must express true preferences, doubts, and objections. Groups must cultivate openness and invite honesty without fear of reprisal. Awareness is the first step. Recognizing the paradox allows reflection on motives. We learn to question assumptions about others' desires and to act with clarity. Resolution emerges not from control, but from transparency. Decision-making improves when silence is replaced with dialogue. Understanding the paradox empowers groups to make choices that reflect shared, rather than imagined, consent. Imagine the family once more. They sit together, speaking openly about their wishes. No one feels pressure to agree. Decisions emerge that reflect true desire. The Abilene Paradox whispers a quiet warning. Group consensus can hide disagreement. Conformity can masquerade as unity. Assumptions about others' preferences can lead to outcomes nobody wants. The lesson is honesty, courage, and awareness. Speak your mind. Listen attentively. Verify assumptions. True agreement arises not from silence, but from communication. The paradox is a reminder that collective action should reflect reality, not imagined expectations. Understanding it allows groups to act wisely, efficiently, and harmoniously. And in that understanding, frustration gives way to clarity, conformity gives way to choice, and silent agreement gives way to authentic consensus. The Abilene Paradox endures as both a caution and a guide. It teaches that human collaboration succeeds only when each voice is heard, each doubt acknowledged, and each desire respected. Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room. A story unfolds before you. The protagonist struggles, suffers, and loses. Tragedy unfolds with a weight that presses on the heart. Yet, paradoxically, you feel drawn to it. There is a pleasure in the pain, a strange satisfaction in watching sorrow, loss, and despair. This is the paradox of tragedy. We seek out sadness, knowing it will unsettle us, yet we embrace it willingly. We find delight in grief, beauty in sorrow, and fascination in the collapse of fortune. The trap is evident. Emotionally, sadness is unpleasant. It evokes empathy, discomfort, and reflection. Yet psychologically, humans are attracted to it. We encounter a contradiction. Pleasure emerges from what is inherently painful. Why would we seek something that diminishes happiness, even momentarily? The paradox challenges intuition, revealing a complexity in human emotional experience. It is not a flaw in reasoning. It is an insight into the depth of perception, the interplay between mind and feeling. Tragedy offers enjoyment precisely because it engages our emotions so fully. Consider a play where a character loses everything. A hero falls, a family shatters, a life dissolves into misfortune. Watching, we feel grief, pity, and anxiety. Yet we remain engaged. There is release in sorrow. There is reflection in loss. There is recognition of beauty in struggle, courage, and vulnerability. Now imagine a film or novel with similar themes. We experience the story emotionally, yet we are aware of the artificial nature of the suffering. This awareness allows detachment, which paradoxically turns sadness into a source of satisfaction. The paradox emerges clearly. We are drawn to sadness not despite its pain, but because of it. It evokes intense emotional experience, a sense of catharsis, and appreciation for complexity. The story is sad, yet it entertains, educates, and engages the mind. The paradox of tragedy can be understood through the lens of emotional complexity. Sad stories engage empathy, imagination, and reflection. They evoke feelings that are unpleasant in isolation, yet satisfying in context. Humans derive pleasure from the process of understanding, interpreting, and processing emotion. Tragedy allows safe engagement with intense feelings. We confront mortality, loss, and failure without real-life consequences. The paradox also reveals a subtle distinction between immediate pain and reflective pleasure. Sorrow is felt in the moment, yet its aftermath provides insight, catharsis, and aesthetic appreciation. The mind transforms suffering into a source of meaning, creating a complex emotional reward. Tragedy is a mirror, reflecting vulnerability, resilience, and human depth. We enjoy it because it deepens understanding of ourselves and the world. The paradox extends beyond art into life. Humans often seek experiences that are emotionally intense, even painful. Challenges, moral dilemmas, and reflective moments evoke similar paradoxical pleasure. Philosophically, the paradox illustrates the duality of human nature. We desire joy, yet we recognize value in discomfort. We seek stability, yet we explore tension. We are both rational and emotional, seeking lessons through experience. Power and influence intersect with this phenomenon. Storytellers, artists, and leaders harness the paradox to evoke empathy, reflection, and engagement. Tragedy can educate, inspire, and shift perspective, making emotional intensity a tool for insight and influence. The paradox also teaches humility. It reveals that pleasure is not merely hedonistic, but cognitive and emotional. We enjoy sadness because it enriches understanding, deepens reflection, and connects us to universal human experience. The paradox of tragedy does not need resolution in the traditional sense. It exists as a reflection of human psychology. Understanding it allows insight into why we seek art, literature, and stories that evoke suffering. The lesson is awareness. Sadness is not merely to be avoided. It is a vehicle for empathy, reflection, and aesthetic experience. Recognizing the paradox teaches appreciation for emotional complexity. We learn to value both pleasure and pain as intertwined elements of human experience. Tragedy becomes not just entertainment, but a tool for understanding emotion, morality, and the human condition. Imagine the story ending. The hero falls, yet the audience sits quietly, reflecting, feeling, and learning. The sadness lingers, yet so does insight, empathy, and appreciation for narrative depth. The paradox whispers a quiet truth. Humans enjoy what challenges, unsettles, and moves them. Pleasure and pain are intertwined. Sorrow can be illuminating, sadness can be enriching. The paradox of tragedy teaches that emotional experience is not simple. We are drawn to what is painful because it connects us to our own humanity, to shared struggle, and to reflection on life. Art, literature, and storytelling are powerful because they exploit this paradox. They allow safe engagement with intensity, cultivating empathy, understanding, and emotional depth. Tragedy endures because it fulfills a deep psychological need, the desire to confront and understand life in its fullness. Sadness becomes both a challenge and a gift. And in that paradox, we find both pleasure and meaning, reflection and awareness, engagement and insight. The paradox does not vanish. It teaches. It enriches. It illuminates the profound complexity of human emotion. Imagine stepping into a machine that bends time. The past stretches before you, inviting exploration. You see a moment from your own life, familiar yet distant. You consider approaching it, interacting with yourself. The possibility is intoxicating. The idea that you could witness your own history, influence it, or converse with your past self is thrilling. Yet with that thrill comes a shadow of unease. Time travel is not merely an adventure. It is a confrontation with causality, with the delicate fabric of cause and effect. Every choice, every movement, carries weight beyond comprehension. The trap is subtle yet profound. If you meet your past self, you risk changing the events that led you to this moment. A single action could erase your own existence or alter the conditions that allowed you to travel back. Attempting to interact with your past self creates a contradiction. You exist because of past events. Altering them could negate your own reason for being. This paradox challenges intuition and destabilizes logic. Time is no longer linear. Cause and effect loop back on themselves, creating uncertainty and contradiction. Imagine standing before your younger self. You see the excitement, the mistakes, the innocence. You are tempted to warn, to guide, to change a painful decision. Yet every word, every gesture carries risk. If your advice prevents an event, it may erase the future that allowed you to exist and travel back. You create a loop, a feedback cycle that defies resolution. Now consider altering a simple choice. A gesture, a decision, a word. It seems minor, yet time is fragile. The future shifts, and you might disappear, never having existed to alter the past. The paradox is clear. Meeting your past self is both impossible and conceivable. Logic demands a resolution that time itself cannot supply. Every action threatens contradiction, yet the desire to act persists. The time travel paradox reveals the fragility of causality. Events are linked in chains. Altering a node in that chain may unravel the entire structure. The paradox also exposes limits in human reasoning. We imagine time as linear, controllable, and continuous. Yet interacting with our past collapses these assumptions. Philosophically, the paradox challenges identity and agency. If you change the past, who are you in the present? If your past actions are influenced by your future self, does causality even exist in the conventional sense? Time travel, in this scenario, is a mirror for reflection. It asks how we understand responsibility, consequence, and selfhood across temporal boundaries. The paradox extends, metaphorically, into life. Decisions ripple backward and forward. Our past shapes us, yet imagining alteration highlights the importance of understanding cause and effect. The paradox also appears in memory and reflection. We revisit old decisions in thought, wonder how different choices might have led to different outcomes. In this way, time travel becomes a mental exercise, exploring causality without breaking reality. Power magnifies the paradox. Those who can influence the past or reinterpret history shape present and future perceptions. Legends, policies, and decisions become loops of influence, much like the theoretical paradox itself. The paradox encourages humility. Even in imagining time travel, we recognize limits of control. We cannot undo the past, yet we can learn from it, reflect on it, and act wisely in the present. The time travel paradox cannot be solved in a literal sense. Meeting or altering the past inherently creates contradiction. Yet understanding the paradox offers clarity. We learn to respect causality, to recognize the weight of decisions, and to act thoughtfully in the present. We see that desires to change the past, while natural, are constrained by logic and reality. The paradox is not a puzzle to solve, but a lens to understand consequence. Through understanding, anxiety about choice transforms into reflection. We focus on influence where it exists, the present. The past is immutable in action, yet malleable in insight. Time travel becomes metaphor for awareness. The lesson is to act consciously, to anticipate consequences, and to accept the impossibility of rewriting history. Imagine stepping back from your younger self. You see mistakes, triumphs, and moments of vulnerability. You resist intervention, not from indifference, but from recognition of consequence. The paradox whispers a quiet truth: the past cannot be changed without contradiction. Actions are connected, causality is fragile, and the desire to control history is always bounded. Yet reflection is possible. We can observe, learn, and integrate understanding into the present. Our growth depends not on altering the past, but on interpreting it. The time travel paradox teaches patience, humility, and respect for cause and effect. It reminds us that while imagining impossible scenarios can illuminate thought, true power lies in acting wisely now. We carry the past within us, yet the present is where choice and consequence reside. In that recognition, the paradox serves not to frustrate, but to illuminate. It shapes how we think, how we act, and how we understand the fragile, intricate flow of time. And in that understanding, we navigate life with insight, care, and awareness. Imagine a mound of sand on a quiet beach. Each grain is small, insignificant on its own. Yet together, they form a heap, a recognizable shape, a mass. Now imagine removing a single grain. The heap remains. Another grain is removed. Still, the heap persists. One by one, grains vanish, almost imperceptibly. And suddenly, the question arises. At what point does the heap cease to be a heap? When does the collection of grains transform into something else entirely? This is the Sorites Paradox. It emerges from the subtle tension between precision and vagueness. We perceive a heap intuitively, yet logic resists defining its boundary. The trap is simple yet profound. Each removal seems inconsequential. Logic suggests continuity. Yet cumulative small changes lead to a striking contradiction. The paradox is a challenge to language and classification. When does something stop being what we recognize it to be? How many grains must disappear before the heap is gone? It is a trap between intuition and reasoning. We understand heaps in practical terms, but the precise boundary eludes definition. The Sorites Paradox exposes the tension between gradual change and categorical thinking. Imagine a teacher demonstrating the paradox. A pile of sand sits on a table. One grain is removed. The class nods. Another grain is removed. The heap seems unchanged. By the time half the grains are gone, the teacher asks, "Is this still a heap?" Some say yes, others hesitate. Eventually, only a few grains remain. The contradiction is clear. Each removal seems trivial, yet the result is unmistakable. No heap remains. The paradox illustrates the difficulty of defining boundaries in continuous processes. The Sorites Paradox is not limited to sand. Consider hair on a head. One hair falls, then another. At what point is a person bald? Or the accumulation of wealth? One coin added, then another. When does one become rich? Each example demonstrates the challenge of vague concepts. Human reasoning relies on categories, yet many phenomena resist exact classification. Gradual change challenges the precision we crave. The paradox highlights the limits of language and logic. Vague terms like heap, bald, or rich rely on perception rather than strict definition. Removing a single grain does not intuitively change category membership, yet repeated removal eventually does. The Sorites Paradox demonstrates that some concepts are inherently fuzzy. Gradual transformation produces outcomes that defy binary classification. Our desire for clarity collides with the reality of continuous change. Philosophically, it teaches humility in reasoning. Not every question has a precise answer. The world exists on a spectrum, yet human language seeks thresholds, boundaries, and absolutes. The paradox forces reflection on how we construct meaning and understand gradual processes. The paradox extends beyond sand. It appears in law, medicine, and policy. When does a collection of actions constitute a crime? When does a symptom indicate disease? When does a series of events amount to significance? Vagueness has consequences. Ambiguity can be exploited by those in power. Laws can be interpreted flexibly. Policies can shift subtly over time without explicit acknowledgement. The paradox also applies to personal perception. We judge relationships, status, and identity gradually. Small changes accumulate, yet recognition of the transition is delayed. In life, the Sorites Paradox reminds us to navigate uncertainty with care. Not every threshold is explicit. Not every change is immediately perceptible. Yet patterns emerge over time, demanding attention and reflection. The Sorites Paradox cannot be solved in a simple way. No precise number of grains defines a heap. Yet understanding the paradox allows insight. We learn to appreciate gradual change. We recognize the limits of categories and the value of flexibility in reasoning. We approach vague concepts with humility, acknowledging the spectrum rather than insisting on binary judgment. The lesson is one of awareness. Change accumulates slowly, often unnoticed. Concepts are tools for understanding, not rigid absolutes. Recognizing vagueness allows measured judgment, reflection, and patience. Imagine the last grains of sand slipping through fingers. The heap is gone, yet each removal seemed inconsequential. The paradox whispers a quiet truth: boundaries are often illusions. Gradual change defies sharp classification, challenging perception, reasoning, and expectation. The Sorites Paradox teaches mindfulness. We learn to observe transitions, to respect continuity, and to understand nuance. Not every change announces itself loudly, yet the cumulative effect is undeniable. In life, the lesson extends beyond sand. We must navigate ambiguity, embrace subtlety, and approach decisions with awareness. Not every threshold is clear, yet insight comes from recognizing patterns, not rigid rules. The heap ceases to exist, yet the journey from presence to absence reveals the complexity of perception. The paradox endures as both a challenge and a guide, illuminating the delicate tension between the gradual and the categorical. And in that understanding, we navigate the world with clarity, patience, and thoughtful reflection. Imagine standing at the edge of a long corridor. At the far end is your goal. You take a step, halving the distance. Another step halves the remaining distance again. Each time, the goal seems just ahead, yet never fully reached. No matter how many steps you take, a fraction remains. The paradox emerges. Can motion ever truly lead to completion? This is Zeno's paradox. It challenges intuition, suggesting that every journey, no matter how straightforward, contains infinite steps. The closer you get, the more elusive the goal becomes. The trap is simple but profound. Logic divides space into infinite segments. Each segment seems traversable, yet the sum of infinite divisions implies motion might be impossible. The paradox confronts human reasoning with a subtle contradiction. Experience tells us we move, we progress, we reach destinations. Reason suggests each step uncovers another step, never allowing completion. This tension between perception and logic forces reflection. We assume that distance and time are continuous, measurable, and finite. Zeno suggests otherwise. Imagine running toward a finish line. You cover half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, then half again. The goal appears ahead, closer each moment, yet always beyond immediate reach. Or consider a swimmer crossing a river. Each stroke brings progress, yet each point reached is preceded by an infinite number of halfway markers. Every movement seems significant, yet reason insists completion is unattainable. The paradox becomes vivid. Each step, though small, reveals a chain of infinitely smaller steps. Motion, in theory, is composed of infinite sequences. The finish line is an illusion, forever approached, never fully arrived at. Zeno forces the mind to wrestle with the continuity of space, time, and action. He asks, is reality composed of discrete steps or a seamless flow? If steps are infinite, how do finite results emerge? The paradox highlights the tension between infinity and finitude. An infinite series of smaller steps may sum to a finite distance. This insight reconciles intuition with logic. Mathematically, the total distance is finite, even if divided infinitely. Motion is possible because the sum of infinite fractions converges. Zeno's insight illuminates the nature of limits, continuity, and convergence. Philosophically, the paradox questions how we understand progress. Every journey contains sub-steps, challenges, and divisions that may seem insurmountable in isolation. Yet viewed holistically, completion is achievable. Zeno's paradox is less a problem to solve than a lens through which to examine persistence, division, and perspective. The paradox extends to life beyond physical motion. Personal goals, professional ambitions, and creative endeavors unfold in infinite small steps. Each task accomplished brings progress, yet infinite subtasks remain. In business, projects require countless micro-decisions before completion. In learning, mastery emerges through repeated practice, each step approaching competence without immediate totality. In relationships, trust and understanding develop gradually through countless interactions. Power and influence magnify the lesson. Leaders navigate infinite details, decisions, and contingencies. Progress occurs incrementally, yet perception of completion can remain elusive. Zeno's paradox teaches patience and awareness. It reminds us that motion and progress are continuous, cumulative, and emergent rather than instantaneous. It challenges the desire for immediacy, emphasizing the importance of perspective on infinite tasks. The paradox is resolved not by abandoning motion, but by understanding the mathematics of infinity. Infinite divisions do not prevent completion. They shape how we comprehend progression. The lesson is subtle. Goals are approached through cumulative action. Every step matters, yet completion is an emergent property of the whole. Zeno encourages reflection on effort, persistence, and the perception of progress. Small actions, even when seemingly insufficient, collectively achieve results. The mind reconciles intuition with abstraction, understanding that infinity and finitude coexist. Completion is possible because reality accommodates convergence. Each step, no matter how small, is essential to reaching the destination. Understanding this principle transforms frustration into patience and appreciation for the journey itself. Imagine reaching the corridor's end. You arrive at the goal, aware of every step that brought you closer. The paradox lingers, yet it no longer obstructs. Zeno's insight whispers a quiet truth: progress emerges through accumulation. Even when paths seem infinitely subdivided, completion is achievable. Each motion, no matter how small, contributes to eventual arrival. The paradox extends beyond motion. It applies to personal growth, learning, creativity, and relationships. Every endeavor unfolds in countless steps, each seemingly minor, yet collectively profound. Persistence transforms the infinite into the finite. Patience reconciles intuition with abstraction. And in that understanding, we reach not only our goals, but a deeper comprehension of effort, progress, and the delicate interplay between infinity and completion. Zeno's paradox endures as both challenge and guide, illuminating the nature of motion, time, and human perseverance. It teaches that even when progress seems infinitely divisible, the journey is real, and the goal is attainable. Imagine two twins, identical in every way, standing side by side. One boards a spaceship destined for the stars. The other remains on Earth, life continuing at its familiar pace. The spaceship accelerates to speeds approaching light. Days, months, years pass in both worlds, yet something strange occurs. When the traveling twin returns, less time has passed for them than for the twin who stayed behind. The paradox emerges. Time itself seems to stretch and compress. The identical twins, once synchronized, now exist in different temporal realities. Relativity has intervened, revealing that motion and gravity can bend the very experience of aging. At first glance, the situation defies intuition. If each twin sees the other moving, should not both experience time differently in the same way? Would not each expect the other to age more slowly? The trap lies in the asymmetry of their experiences. One twin undergoes acceleration and deceleration, leaving the inertial frame of reference. The other remains stationary in a single frame. The paradox arises from our expectations of uniformity. We assume time is constant, predictable, absolute. Yet relativity challenges this, showing that time is flexible, dependent on motion and perspective. Consider the traveling twin approaching near light speed. On board the spaceship, days feel ordinary. Meals are eaten, sleep occurs, thoughts unfold as if no difference exists. Meanwhile, Earth experiences years. Seasons change, societies evolve. The stationary twin grows older in ways the traveler cannot perceive. Upon return, the temporal discrepancy is undeniable. One twin has aged decades less than the other. The paradox lies in expectation versus reality. Logic based on intuition predicts identical aging, yet physics demonstrates otherwise. The scenario reveals the subtlety of time. Motion at extreme speeds alters experience in ways our minds struggle to grasp. Time is not a universal constant, but a personal dimension shaped by velocity and frame of reference. The twin paradox is rooted in the principles of special relativity. Time dilation occurs because the faster one moves relative to another frame, the slower time progresses for them. Acceleration and deceleration break the symmetry. Only one twin undergoes these changes, creating a real difference in elapsed time. Physics resolves the paradox. Relativity is internally consistent, even when counterintuitive. Conceptually, the paradox illustrates that reality is not always aligned with intuition. Human expectation assumes uniformity, yet the universe obeys laws that operate beyond everyday experience. Time itself is a flexible construct, dependent on perspective and motion, reminding us that the world is stranger and more subtle than it appears. The twin paradox extends beyond physics into philosophy and human reflection. It challenges assumptions about equality, simultaneity, and shared experience. In life, we may live at different speeds, perceive events differently, and age uniquely in our experiences. Perception is relative, just as time is relative in motion. No two perspectives are identical, and understanding requires awareness of context and frame of reference. Power and influence are shaped by perspective. Leaders, travelers, and innovators experience time differently than those stationary in routine. The paradox offers a metaphor for asymmetry in understanding, decision-making, and consequence. It also highlights the limits of intuition. Expectations built on everyday experience can fail in extreme contexts, whether in physics or human behavior. Reality often transcends familiar logic, demanding study, observation, and humility. The paradox cannot be solved by intuition alone. It requires comprehension of relativistic principles. Time is not universal. Motion shapes the flow of experience. The lesson is awareness and humility. Our perception is bound by context, and expectations may not match reality. Understanding emerges from studying the laws that govern phenomena, not from relying on assumptions. The twin paradox teaches that progress, aging, and experience are not uniform. It encourages patience and reflection, recognizing that others may inhabit different temporal realities, literal or metaphorical. Completion, growth, and transformation unfold according to the rules of the universe, not merely our anticipation. Imagine the twins reunited. The traveler steps onto Earth, decades younger than the sibling who remained behind. Time has been bent, stretched, and experienced differently, yet both lives are real, both complete. The twin paradox whispers a quiet truth: reality is not bound by intuition. Time, like perception, is relative. Experience depends on perspective, motion, and context. Life, like the paradox, is richer and stranger than it appears. Patience, awareness, and study allow understanding of phenomena beyond ordinary perception. The paradox teaches that comparison is often misleading, and true comprehension requires acknowledging perspective and context. In this recognition, the paradox transforms from puzzle to lesson. We learn to navigate the world with insight, humility, and acceptance of difference. Time may bend, experience may vary, yet the journey and its significance remain profound for each observer, each twin, and each traveler. The twin paradox endures as both a scientific and philosophical guide, reminding us that reality is layered, perception is relative, and understanding emerges from careful reflection. Imagine standing before two choices. In one, a certain reward awaits. In the other, a gamble promises more, yet carries risk. At first glance, logic seems straightforward. Expected outcomes can be calculated, probabilities assessed, rational decisions made. Yet human intuition resists strict calculation. Faced with choices, certainty tempts us, even when risk could yield higher gain. The paradox arises when decisions appear inconsistent, when rational expectation fails to predict action. This is the Allais Paradox. It demonstrates that human decision-making is not always linear, not always predictable, not always rational. Risk, reward, and perception intertwine in ways that challenge classical reasoning. The trap is subtle. If expected utility theory held perfectly, one choice would always dominate. People would consistently select options that maximize objective gain. Yet experiments reveal otherwise. When faced with certainty versus probabilistic reward, humans often favor the certain outcome, switch scenarios slightly, and preferences shift in ways that contradict the original choice. The paradox exposes the tension between logic and intuition. It highlights the gaps between theoretical rationality and practical decision-making. We believe we act rationally, yet our minds weigh certainty, fear, and perceived risk differently than formulas predict. Consider a lottery. Option A offers a guaranteed reward of a certain sum. Option B offers a much larger sum, yet only with a high probability. Most choose the certainty of A, even though the expected value of B is higher. Now alter the scenario. The sums are larger, or the probabilities slightly different. Preferences invert. Individuals favor riskier B over certain A, defying previous behavior. The paradox becomes clear. Rational models predict a consistent preference pattern. Human choices do not follow that pattern. Emotions, perception of risk, and cognitive biases intervene. Allais demonstrates that the mind does not calculate purely in numbers. Certainty carries a weight that probability cannot always counterbalance. The apparent inconsistency is not random. It reflects the human valuation of security, the subtle psychology behind decision-making. The Allais Paradox illustrates the divergence between normative theory and descriptive reality. Expected utility theory prescribes the choice that maximizes mathematical benefit. Human behavior, however, evaluates certainty, fear, and perception of loss. We assign subjective value to outcomes. We overweigh near certainties and underweight probabilistic gains. The paradox exposes the limitations of classical rationality in modeling real decisions. Philosophically, the Allais Paradox challenges assumptions about reason. Rationality is not solely numeric. It is psychological, emotional, and context-dependent. Human thought is adaptive, but not always logically linear. Decision-making is as much about perception as it is about calculation. The paradox applies beyond lotteries and abstract problems. Financial markets, insurance, policy, and governance all reveal similar patterns. People overvalue certainty, undervalue probabilistic gain, and misjudge risk. In leadership and negotiation, perception of safety can dominate purely rational analysis. Policy designed with cold mathematics may fail if human psychology is ignored. Understanding the paradox illuminates behavior, strategy, and influence. The paradox also extends to daily life. We avoid ventures that seem risky, even when they offer better outcomes. We cling to familiar options, overestimating losses and underestimating potential gains. The lesson is clear. Decisions are guided by both rational calculation and subjective evaluation. The Allais Paradox cannot be solved, in the sense of forcing human behavior to align with theory. Instead, it teaches awareness. Understanding why choices deviate from expected utility clarifies decision-making processes. We learn to recognize the influence of certainty, loss aversion, and cognitive bias. We accept that human rationality is bounded, context-dependent, and psychologically mediated. Awareness allows better planning, communication, and evaluation of risk. The paradox emphasizes that insight is more valuable than prediction. We may not always act rationally in classical terms, but understanding the mechanisms behind our choices transforms uncertainty into reflection. In business, personal life, and policy, comprehension of behavioral tendencies is more effective than blind adherence to formulaic logic. Imagine standing again before two choices. One offers certainty, the other risk. Your mind weighs the known against the unknown, fear against hope, comfort against potential reward. The Allais Paradox whispers a quiet truth: rationality is nuanced. Human choice is neither random nor purely logical. It reflects values, perception, and the inherent tension between safety and opportunity. Life, like the paradox, is a balance of certainty and risk. We navigate decisions with intuition shaped by experience, psychology, and context. Understanding this paradox fosters patience, reflection, and a deeper awareness of human behavior. In this recognition lies wisdom. Choices are rarely purely mathematical, yet neither are they arbitrary. By observing patterns, acknowledging bias, and respecting perception, we approach decisions with clarity, insight, and calm deliberation. The Allais Paradox endures as both a scientific and philosophical guide. It reminds us that human behavior is layered, complex, and meaningful, even when it defies expectation. It teaches humility in judgment and subtlety in evaluation. And in that understanding, we navigate the world with patience, awareness, and thoughtful discernment. Imagine a quiet town where every household begins to save more diligently. Each family cuts back on spending, cautious and prudent. From an individual perspective, these decisions seem wise. Resources accumulate, security grows, future uncertainty appears manageable. Yet beneath this calm, unseen forces begin to stir. Businesses notice fewer purchases. Revenue drops. Workers are laid off. Production slows. The town, once vibrant with exchange and activity, falters. This is the paradox of thrift. A choice that benefits the individual can undermine the collective. Saving, a virtue at the personal level, becomes a subtle agent of harm at the societal scale. The trap lies in scale and perspective. Individually, saving strengthens security. Collectively, if everyone saves simultaneously, demand falls, investment diminishes, and economic activity contracts. Logic collides with intuition. The prudent course for one person conflicts with the optimal outcome for all. The paradox reveals a tension between self-interest and communal consequence. We assume what is good for the individual is good for society. The paradox challenges this assumption, forcing reconsideration of how interconnected systems operate. Picture a family deciding to postpone buying a new stove. The store loses revenue. Suppliers adjust production downward. Jobs are cut. Other families follow suit. Each household saving feels secure, but the chain reaction undermines the local economy. Now expand this scenario to an entire nation. Consumers everywhere pull back. Banks tighten lending. Industries hesitate to invest. The economy slows. Unemployment rises. Even those who continue saving find that their accumulated security is threatened by the broader decline. The paradox is clear. Collective thrift produces collective harm. Individual prudence accumulates into systemic fragility. Rational action in isolation leads to irrational outcomes in the aggregate. This tension embodies a deep lesson about interconnectedness. Choices are never purely personal. They ripple outward, producing consequences that may contradict intention. The paradox of thrift illustrates a fundamental principle in economics and philosophy. Systems composed of interdependent actors behave differently than isolated individuals. What strengthens the part can weaken the whole. Savings reduce current consumption. Reduced consumption lowers aggregate demand, slowing production and employment. This creates a feedback loop. Less income leads to less spending, which leads to further contraction. At the conceptual level, the paradox reminds us that context matters. Human behavior cannot be understood purely in isolation. The interplay between individual action and collective outcome defines complex systems, revealing counterintuitive truths. Philosophically, it challenges assumptions about morality, prudence, and responsibility. The ethical pursuit of security may inadvertently contribute to communal instability. Intuition fails in the face of systemic complexity. The paradox appears in policy, business, and social organization. During economic downturns, government spending may need to rise while households cut back. Stimulus programs aim to offset individual prudence with collective intervention. The lesson also applies beyond economics. In communities, overemphasis on self-preservation can weaken collective resilience. In organizations, individuals hoarding information or resources can slow progress. In ecology, species overconserving certain resources can alter ecosystem balance. Power dynamics influence the impact of thrift. Those with influence can shape collective outcomes by adjusting spending, investment, or regulation. The paradox demonstrates that systemic understanding requires awareness of both micro and macro behavior. The paradox is not resolved by abandoning thrift. Saving remains a virtue for individuals. The resolution lies in understanding scale and balance. Insight comes from recognizing the tension between personal prudence and collective stability. Policy, coordination, and cooperative behavior mediate the paradox. Stimulating spending during slowdowns, encouraging responsible investment, and maintaining trust in exchange all help reconcile individual action with systemic health. The lesson is broader than economics. It teaches mindfulness of ripple effects, patience with complex systems, and the humility to see beyond immediate gains. Understanding emerges from observing patterns and consequences rather than imposing rigid rules on behavior. Imagine the town recovering. Families balance saving with spending. Businesses stabilize. Jobs return. Confidence grows. The paradox lingers as a quiet reminder. What seems wise in isolation may have unintended consequences when multiplied. The paradox of thrift speaks to the tension between self-interest and shared well-being. It teaches that prudence, though valuable, must be exercised with awareness of interconnected systems. Choices are never isolated. Consequences propagate, often subtly, through the structures we inhabit. In life, as in economics, wisdom requires perspective. Understanding scale, interdependence, and feedback loops allows action that is both prudent and constructive. The paradox endures as a guide. Act wisely, observe deeply, and remember that individual virtue can have collective costs. Balance, insight, and awareness transform apparent contradictions into opportunities for reflection and thoughtful action. Saving is not wrong, yet understanding its broader effects is essential. The paradox of thrift endures as both caution and counsel, illuminating the delicate interplay between personal decision and communal consequence. Look up at the night sky. Countless stars, countless planets, countless possibilities. The universe stretches beyond comprehension, ancient and vast. Logic suggests that with so many worlds, intelligent life should exist elsewhere. Civilizations should rise, expand, communicate, explore. Yet the cosmos is silent. No signals, no signs, no contact. This is the Fermi Paradox. The contradiction between expectation and observation. The universe should teem with life, yet we hear nothing. A mystery that confronts our understanding of existence, probability, and the nature of life itself. The paradox rests on a subtle tension. If life is probable, why is it absent from our observations? If life is rare, why does the scale of the universe suggest it should be common? Our reasoning confronts the limits of knowledge. We apply probability to an unknown system. We assume conditions on Earth are typical, yet the cosmos may follow rules we cannot yet perceive. The trap is expectation. We project our understanding, our history, our assumptions onto the universe. Silence contradicts this projection, forcing a reconsideration of probabilities, biases, and cosmic perspective. Consider two predictions. Prediction 1. Life is abundant. Civilizations emerge, technology develops, interstellar travel becomes possible. Yet the galaxy is quiet. Signals do not arrive. Colonization is absent. The prediction clashes with observation. The universe should be alive with evidence, but we detect none. Prediction 2. Life is exceedingly rare. Earth is an anomaly. Intelligence is fragile, fleeting, and improbable. Yet the sheer number of stars, planets, and eons makes this unlikely. Statistical reasoning suggests that life should arise multiple times. The tension becomes apparent. Either life is common and silence is inexplicable, or life is rare and the odds are staggering. Both outcomes challenge our intuition, our logic, and our sense of cosmic place. The paradox invites reflection on uncertainty, probability, and the limits of knowledge. It reveals the fragility of human reasoning when applied to the infinite and unknown. The Fermi Paradox illustrates the conflict between expectation and reality. It exposes the limits of extrapolating from a single data point, Earth, across the cosmos. It highlights that probability alone cannot answer questions about existence. The paradox also emphasizes the role of observation. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Civilizations may exist in forms we cannot detect, communicate in ways we cannot perceive, or perish before reaching detectability. Philosophically, the paradox questions anthropocentrism. We assume our perspective and time frame are representative. The universe may operate on scales of time, energy, and awareness far beyond human comprehension. The Fermi Paradox challenges the assumption that life, intelligence, or communication must mirror human patterns. It teaches humility in the face of the vast, the old, and the unknown. The paradox has implications beyond astronomy. It reminds us that absence of evidence in any system, societal, ecological, or technological, does not imply non-existence. In human affairs, silence may conceal influence, growth, or presence we do not yet perceive. In ecosystems, species or processes may exist undetected, yet shape outcomes. In technology, innovations may develop quietly, unseen, until their impact arrives suddenly. Power and perspective shape observation. Our ability to perceive, detect, or interpret signals is limited. The paradox invites reflection on scale, patience, and epistemic humility. It cautions against certainty and encourages openness to unseen forces and possibilities. The Fermi Paradox is less a puzzle to solve than a lens to understand the universe and our place within it. We may never know the abundance of life beyond Earth, yet awareness of the paradox sharpens perspective. Understanding emerges through recognition of scale, uncertainty, and limitation. We learn to temper expectation with humility. We learn that silence may conceal richness, complexity, and existence beyond perception. The lesson extends to knowledge itself. Observation is bounded, inference is imperfect, and assumptions can mislead. The paradox encourages careful reasoning, patience, and acceptance of mystery. Knowledge grows not by certainty, but by exploration, reflection, and measured inference. Imagine the universe in its fullness. Stars burn, planets orbit, life may emerge and fade, civilizations may rise and vanish beyond our reach. The silence we perceive is but a fragment of the cosmic story. The Fermi Paradox whispers a quiet truth: existence is vast, complex, and unpredictable. Absence of evidence challenges expectation, but invites deeper inquiry. Human perspective is limited, yet curiosity persists. The paradox teaches humility, reflection, and wonder. It reminds us that life, intelligence, and communication may flourish in forms and times we cannot yet detect. It reminds us that our understanding is provisional, our observations partial, our knowledge incomplete. In embracing this paradox, we cultivate patience and curiosity. We explore not only the cosmos, but the boundaries of reason, expectation, and imagination. The silence of the stars becomes a meditation on possibility, scale, and the mysterious depth of existence. Fermi's insight endures as both challenge and guide. It teaches that the universe is stranger than we assume, more profound than we perceive, and infinitely worthy of wonder. Imagine a lush valley where crops flourish and rivers teem with fish. Resources seem endless. Every need is met. Security appears guaranteed. At first, abundance brings prosperity. Life thrives, populations grow, and stability feels assured. Yet hidden within this plenty lies a subtle danger. Too much of a good thing can destabilize the very systems it nourishes. An ecosystem, a society, or an economy can collapse under the weight of its own enrichment. This is the paradox of enrichment. Prosperity, when untempered, can produce fragility. The trap is in intuition. We assume more is better. More food, more wealth, more resources should strengthen resilience. Yet in complex systems, excess can amplify instability. Populations overshoot, consumption outpaces regeneration, predators overexploit prey, markets overextend. The very abundance intended to secure well-being creates conditions for collapse. Logic and intuition diverge. Individual success seems advantageous, but when multiplied across a system, the outcome can be disastrous. The paradox forces recognition of limits within abundance. Consider a pond suddenly enriched with nutrients. Algae blooms rapidly, fish populations surge to exploit the bounty. Initially, the pond appears healthier. Productivity increases. But soon, oxygen depletes, competition intensifies, predators overwhelm prey, and the ecosystem oscillates wildly. A stable system destabilized by excess collapses in unexpected cycles. Now imagine this principle applied to human systems. Overinvestment, oversupply, or excessive growth may trigger boom and bust cycles. Markets become fragile. Communities dependent on surplus may experience sudden shortages. The paradox repeats. Enrichment intended to stabilize can instead provoke volatility. Even in personal life, the principle resonates. Too many choices, too much stimulation, or excessive accumulation can overwhelm, exhaust, or destabilize. Balance and restraint emerge as necessary companions to abundance. The paradox of enrichment demonstrates that abundance interacts with feedback loops in complex systems. Systems self-regulate under scarcity, but excess magnifies fluctuations. In ecological models, more food allows prey to grow faster, attracting more predators. Predators may overconsume, causing prey collapse, which then leads to predator decline. Cycles of boom and bust emerge naturally. The principle extends to economics and society. Uncontrolled accumulation or growth can strain infrastructure, social cohesion, and sustainability. Abundance is not inherently stabilizing. It can be destabilizing if feedback mechanisms are not accounted for. Philosophically, the paradox questions assumptions about growth, progress, and prosperity. It reminds us that more is not always better. Restraint, moderation, and understanding systemic limits are critical to maintaining resilience. The paradox resonates across human experience. In ecosystems, unchecked enrichment causes collapse of fisheries, forests, and agricultural systems. In economies, rapid accumulation can create bubbles and financial crises. In organizations, overextension of resources or personnel can overwhelm systems and reduce effectiveness. Power magnifies the paradox. Those with influence can enrich systems, yet mismanagement of abundance may propagate instability. Governance, foresight, and understanding of systemic interactions are essential to prevent collapse. The principle also applies to culture and knowledge. Information overload, excessive choice, or rapid expansion can create confusion, stress, and instability. Resilience requires measured growth and attention to limits. The paradox of enrichment cannot be solved by rejecting abundance. Resources, prosperity, and opportunity remain desirable. The solution lies in comprehension and balance. Understanding emerges from observing system dynamics, feedback loops, and interactions. Growth must be accompanied by regulation, foresight, and adaptation. Sustainability, whether ecological, economic, or personal, requires awareness of how abundance affects stability. The lesson extends beyond systems theory. It teaches humility and prudence. It encourages reflection on how power, resources, and opportunity interact with limits and constraints. In recognizing potential fragility, we act not by denying enrichment, but by integrating moderation and resilience. Imagine the valley once again. Rivers flow, crops thrive, fish populations flourish, yet cycles are managed. Surplus is balanced with care, consumption with regeneration. Life continues with vigor, yet without the risk of sudden collapse. The paradox of enrichment offers a quiet wisdom. Abundance is not a guarantee of stability. More can lead to fragility, and prosperity without insight can precipitate downfall. In life, as in nature, moderation, foresight, and understanding of systemic dynamics are essential. Balance allows growth without destabilization, productivity without collapse, abundance without chaos. The paradox teaches reflection, patience, and awareness. It reminds us that good intentions and prosperity are insufficient alone. We must consider the structures within which abundance operates, the feedback that governs systems, and the limits that ensure endurance. Enrichment is a tool, not a guarantee. Wisdom lies in observing the cycles, understanding the interactions, and exercising restraint alongside growth. The paradox of enrichment endures as a lesson in subtlety, foresight, and the delicate art of sustaining life and prosperity. Imagine a scientist who receives a manuscript detailing a brilliant theory. It is complete, flawless, revolutionary. She studies it, inspired, and later travels back in time. She delivers the manuscript to a younger version of herself. The paradox emerges. Where did the idea originate? The manuscript exists without a creator. The theory is transmitted from future to past, looping infinitely without origin. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. It challenges the linearity of cause and effect. It questions the origin of objects, ideas, and information when time itself bends. The trap lies in expectation. We assume every effect has a cause. Every creation must have an origin. Yet in the Bootstrap Paradox, cause and effect intertwine. An object or piece of knowledge appears in the past because it exists in the future. There is no clear point of creation. Logic and intuition collide. Time seems to allow its own rules to fold, to loop, to invert. The paradox confronts the limits of understanding when linear causality is suspended. Consider a watch that a time traveler brings from the future. She leaves it in the past for her younger self. Decades later, the younger version uses the watch, eventually passing it to the older self, who then travels back in time. The watch exists, functional, precise, yet with no clear point of origin. It is not created, only looped through time. Now imagine a musical composition. A composer receives a symphony from the future, studies it, and later transmits it to its own author in the past. Who truly composed it? The music exists, celebrated, yet without creation in the conventional sense. The paradox forces reflection on causality. It challenges assumptions about beginnings, ends, and the temporal sequence of events. Objects, ideas, and knowledge may emerge in loops where the notion of origin is meaningless. The Bootstrap Paradox demonstrates that linear causality is not absolute. Time loops create situations where origin and creation dissolve. Objects and information can exist without a true beginning. Philosophically, it confronts assumptions about authorship, responsibility, and existence. If something exists without creation, traditional notions of ownership, agency, and causation falter. The paradox is a meditation on the fluidity of time and the limitations of human reasoning when confronted with temporal loops. It also illustrates a form of self-consistency in paradoxical systems. Even without an origin, the loop maintains coherence. The watch functions, the manuscript inspires, the symphony plays. The system operates consistently, yet without conventional causality. Beyond time travel fiction, the paradox echoes in knowledge transmission and innovation. Ideas often appear inspired by unknown sources, as if information emerges from nowhere. Cultural transmission, memes, and collaborative creativity reflect similar dynamics, where origin is diffuse or uncertain. The paradox also applies to technology and discovery. Invention often relies on prior tools, some borrowed, some developed independently, yet exact origins are obscured. Knowledge builds upon itself, looping through generations, without a single point of creation. Power in these systems is subtle. Understanding causality, loops, and temporal feedback can shift perspective on agency, responsibility, and influence. The paradox illuminates how outcomes may be shaped without a clear point of intervention. The Bootstrap Paradox cannot be solved in the sense of restoring linear causality. The origin is intrinsically absent. Resolution lies in comprehension. Understanding emerges from accepting the limitations of cause and effect when applied to loops. The paradox encourages reflection on temporal dynamics, contingency, and the nature of creation. In broader terms, it teaches humility. Not every outcome requires a single cause, nor every object a singular origin. Systems may sustain themselves through loops, reinforcing stability even in the absence of clear beginnings. The lesson extends beyond time travel. It encourages open-mindedness toward complex systems, feedback loops, and nonlinear processes. Insight replaces certainty. Observation replaces assumption. Imagine the manuscript, the watch, the symphony, looping through time. They exist, functioning, meaningful, yet without origin. The paradox does not destroy coherence. It reshapes understanding. The Bootstrap Paradox whispers a quiet truth. Creation is not always linear, and cause may follow effect as easily as effect follows cause. The universe may harbor systems beyond immediate comprehension, operating with rules we cannot intuit. Human perspective is limited by the arrow of time, yet imagination and reflection allow glimpses into nonlinear possibilities. The paradox teaches patience, contemplation, and humility. It reminds us that existence can be coherent without conventional beginnings, meaningful without identifiable creators, and real without traditional causation. In accepting the Bootstrap Paradox, we embrace uncertainty, complexity, and the elegance of loops. We recognize that stability and function can exist in systems without origin, and insight lies not in forcing linearity, but in understanding interdependence, continuity, and temporal harmony. The paradox endures as a meditation on time, causality, and creation itself. It challenges assumptions, stretches reasoning, and deepens awareness of the subtle interplay between existence and origin, between effect and cause. Imagine a scholar seated before a vast library. Books line every wall, scrolls stacked in towers, knowledge accumulated over centuries. At first, the scholar feels mastery, understanding, control. Each book offers answers, each discovery illuminates mysteries. Yet as the scholar reads, the sense of certainty fades. With every question answered, new questions arise, deeper and more complex. This is the knowledge paradox. The pursuit of understanding does not lead to finality, but to awareness of the infinite unknown. The more one knows, the more one confronts the vastness of ignorance. The trap is an assumption. We believe knowledge leads to certainty. We imagine that learning provides clarity, that answers resolve confusion. Yet the paradox reveals a subtle tension. Acquiring knowledge expands the horizon of what is unknown. The greater the understanding, the sharper the perception of gaps, contradictions, and uncertainties. Logic and intuition diverge. Progress in knowledge does not contract ignorance. It exposes its depth. The paradox challenges the assumption that wisdom is a destination rather than a process. Picture a scientist who deciphers a complex theory. The solution solves one problem, yet reveals 10 more unanswered questions. The clarity achieved magnifies the awareness of what remains obscure. Consider a philosopher studying morality. Every insight into human behavior uncovers new dilemmas, conflicts, and contradictions. Certainty recedes as understanding deepens. In practical terms, knowledge expands the perception of risk, ambiguity, and limitation. An engineer mastering one system realizes the interconnections, dependencies, and vulnerabilities of others. A doctor understanding one disease recognizes countless unknown variables in biology and human behavior. The paradox is universal. Knowledge increases not only skill, but awareness of limitations. It is a mirror reflecting both mastery and the endless expanse beyond comprehension. The knowledge paradox illustrates a self-referential property of learning. Knowledge is cumulative, yet awareness of unknowns grows simultaneously. Understanding is not linear. It multiplies complexity. Philosophically, the paradox aligns with humility and Socratic insight. Wisdom begins in recognizing one's ignorance. True understanding acknowledges limits. The deeper the inquiry, the more one sees the boundaries of certainty. This dynamic applies across disciplines. In mathematics, solving one problem often reveals many new unsolved questions. In history, interpreting one era exposes complexities in countless others. In life, personal reflection uncovers patterns, contradictions, and ambiguities previously unseen. The paradox is not discouraging. It is a recognition that knowledge is dynamic, ever-expanding, and intertwined with curiosity. The paradox resonates beyond scholarship. In governance, decision-makers learn more about society only to recognize limits, conflicts, and unintended consequences. In technology, acquiring expertise reveals vulnerabilities and ethical dilemmas previously unnoticed. In personal life, experiences illuminate the depth of human emotion, perception, and uncertainty. Power and knowledge intersect subtly. Those who seek mastery must also confront complexity. Influence depends not only on what is known, but on recognition of what cannot be fully known or controlled. The paradox encourages reflection on humility, patience, and the iterative nature of understanding. It teaches that confidence must be tempered with awareness, and insight must coexist with openness to uncertainty. The knowledge paradox cannot be eliminated. It is intrinsic to learning. Resolution lies not in certainty, but in embracing the process. Understanding grows from accepting that knowledge is a journey rather than a destination. Curiosity becomes the guiding principle, humility the companion. The more one learns, the more one sees the need for reflection, skepticism, and continuous inquiry. The lesson is profound. Knowledge should not create arrogance, but wisdom. Awareness of the unknown is not weakness, but strength, enabling measured decisions, thoughtful action, and deeper insight. The paradox reframes the pursuit of knowledge as an adventure into both discovery and self-awareness. The more one learns, the richer the perception of mystery, complexity, and interconnection. Imagine the scholar in the library once more. Books surround, ideas flow, questions multiply. Certainty is elusive, yet insight is abundant. The knowledge paradox whispers a quiet truth. To know is to recognize the vastness of what remains unknown. Wisdom lies in embracing this tension. Learning is not conquest, it is exploration. Understanding is not closure, it is awareness. In life, the paradox teaches patience, reflection, and curiosity. It reminds us that mastery is partial, that insight is provisional, and that humility is the foundation of true wisdom. Knowledge is a ladder that ascends into the infinite, each step revealing more horizon, more questions, more possibilities. The paradox endures as both guide and meditation, inviting continuous inquiry, thoughtful reflection, and appreciation of the boundless landscape of understanding. The more you know, the more you realize you do not. And in that realization lies the heart of wisdom, curiosity, and the endless pursuit of truth. Imagine a person standing at the edge of a path that leads to mastery. They wish to grow, to evolve, to become better. Every day is filled with exercises, practices, plans, and goals. Yet despite relentless effort, progress feels elusive. The harder they push, the more tension arises. The paradox emerges. Striving intensely can itself obstruct growth. This is the paradox of self-improvement. The very pursuit of betterment can inhibit the transformation it seeks to create. It is a subtle trap, where intention conflicts with outcome. The trap lies in belief. We assume effort is proportional to growth. More practice, more control, more discipline should produce faster results. Yet human development is not purely linear. The mind, the body, and the spirit respond to balance as much as effort. Overexertion creates pressure, rigidity, and resistance. Logic and intuition collide. Trying too hard can create tension that blocks learning, stifles creativity, and freezes natural adaptation. The paradox challenges the assumption that improvement is always accelerated by intensity. Consider a musician striving to perfect a difficult piece. Hours of practice lead to fatigue, frustration, and tension in every motion. The fluidity once present vanishes. What should have emerged effortlessly becomes forced, mechanical, and constrained. Now imagine an athlete training relentlessly for performance. Overtraining leads to injury, mental exhaustion, and diminished skill execution. The pursuit of strength becomes the obstacle to peak performance. The same principle applies to learning, personal growth, and emotional development. Trying too hard to force understanding or control feelings often results in stagnation. Effort becomes resistance, and ambition becomes a cage. The paradox is universal. Growth requires surrender, patience, and integration as much as action. Pushing excessively can disrupt the natural rhythm of progress. The paradox of self-improvement highlights a tension between control and adaptation. Systems, whether human psychology, skill acquisition, or personal transformation, thrive under feedback and equilibrium. Excessive effort increases pressure, reduces flexibility, and blocks the spontaneous emergence of change. Philosophically, the paradox aligns with the idea that growth is emergent, not forced. It cannot be commanded into being. Mastery unfolds gradually, often in moments of ease, reflection, or unintentional practice. Effort without mindfulness, intensity without awareness, and striving without integration often backfire. The paradox reveals that self-improvement is both action and surrender, discipline and patience. Understanding the balance is key. The paradox applies beyond personal development. In education, rigid teaching methods can stifle curiosity and critical thinking. In leadership, micromanagement can reduce the growth of teams. In innovation, excessive control can crush creativity and discovery. Even societies are affected. Excessive regulation or over-intervention can inhibit natural adaptation and evolution. Effort without awareness often generates resistance, inefficiency, and unintended consequences. Power and influence intersect with the paradox subtly. Those who seek to improve systems or individuals must recognize that facilitation, patience, and trust can be more effective than relentless force. Guidance must coexist with space for organic growth. The paradox of self-improvement cannot be resolved by pushing harder. The solution is understanding. Growth requires a balance between effort and ease, discipline and surrender. Awareness of limits allows intention to guide without constraining. Patience cultivates integration. Reflection deepens skill. Rest enables assimilation. Transformation emerges not from overexertion, but from rhythm, presence, and consistency. The lesson is profound. Self-improvement is not a battle, it is a dialogue with oneself. Progress is revealed in subtle shifts, in adaptation, and in the quiet moments when effort aligns with flow. The paradox reframes striving as practice in balance, awareness, and attunement. The more we try to control, the more we risk blocking the natural emergence of growth. Imagine the person once again on the path to mastery. They move with intention, but also with attention to rhythm. They practice, reflect, rest, and allow integration to occur. The paradox of self-improvement whispers a quiet truth. Growth is not always proportional to effort. Trying too hard can obstruct progress. Patience, presence, and awareness often accomplish more than relentless pushing. In life, as in skill, transformation thrives in balance. Discipline must be tempered with surrender, action with observation, striving with trust. Mastery is not forced into existence. It unfolds when effort harmonizes with the natural process of development. The paradox endures as a reminder. To improve, one must sometimes step back, allow, and trust in the emergent rhythm of growth. Effort is essential, yet it must coexist with ease, space, and presence. The art of self-improvement is the art of balance, where trying too hard becomes the very thing that blocks the journey forward. Imagine a leader seated at the top of a tower, the city sprawling below. Decisions, commands, responsibilities weigh on every thought. They possess wealth, influence, and authority beyond measure. Yet despite the outward appearance of freedom, something feels constrained. Every choice carries consequences, every action scrutinized, every moment measured. The paradox of power emerges. The greater the power one holds, the less free one may feel. Power appears to grant autonomy, yet it often imposes hidden chains. The very structures that amplify influence also limit the options available to those who wield it. Freedom and control diverge as authority grows. The trap is an assumption. We believe power equates to freedom. We imagine that the more control we possess, the less constrained we become. Yet experience and observation reveal tension. Power increases responsibility, visibility, and obligation. With influence comes expectation. With authority comes scrutiny. With capacity comes constraint. Logic and intuition conflict. The more one commands, the more one must consider consequences, manage dependencies, and adhere to rules of perception. The paradox challenges the assumption that power liberates rather than binds. Consider a CEO managing a multinational corporation. Every decision affects thousands, even millions. A single misstep can cascade into economic loss, public outrage, or legal trouble. Despite ultimate authority, every action is filtered through consequence and perception. Choices that once seemed simple now feel impossible. Now imagine a political leader. Influence allows directives, legislation, and policy. Yet every move is monitored, every statement weighed, every intention questioned. The responsibility of leadership constrains behavior. The apparent freedom of power is replaced by the subtle captivity of obligation. Even in smaller spheres, the pattern persists. A parent with authority over a child feels restricted by the responsibility to guide wisely. A mentor with influence over students is constrained by the ethical implications of every action. Power always carries the weight of accountability. The paradox of power illustrates a tension between control and autonomy. Authority grants ability to shape outcomes, yet it simultaneously restricts personal freedom. The higher the position, the narrower the room for spontaneous, unconstrained action. Philosophically, the paradox echoes the principle that with great power comes great responsibility. Responsibility introduces limits, obligations, and expectations. Freedom is not simply the absence of constraint, but the ability to act without external or internal pressures. Power creates pressures both seen and unseen. The paradox is self-reinforcing. Authority generates consequences, consequences demand attention, and attention constrains choice. The illusion of liberty is replaced by the reality of encumbrance. Beyond individual experience, the paradox resonates in societal, organizational, and political structures. Monarchs, presidents, and CEOs have all described the tension between influence and constraint. Systems of power require accountability, transparency, and adherence to rules, which in turn limit autonomous action. Even in personal life, control over resources, relationships, or projects can reduce freedom. The more one manages, protects, or influences, the more attention is demanded, the more responsibilities accumulate. Autonomy becomes conditional, flexible choices narrow, and personal spontaneity diminishes. Power and responsibility are inseparable. Those who seek influence must recognize the subtle chains it imposes. Control and freedom are not synonymous. Power often creates its own limitations. The paradox of power cannot be resolved by seeking more influence. Freedom is not directly proportional to authority. Resolution lies in understanding the relationship between responsibility, constraint, and choice. Those who hold power benefit from awareness. Recognizing the hidden pressures allows better navigation, more mindful decisions, and measured use of authority. Freedom emerges not from increasing control, but from aligning power with values, ethical principles, and strategic restraint. The lesson is profound. True influence is exercised not merely by accumulation of authority, but by wise and conscious application. Freedom is cultivated through perspective, balance, and acceptance of inherent constraints. The paradox reframes ambition. Power is not a path to absolute liberty, but a tool whose value lies in intention and awareness. Understanding the dynamics of responsibility and consequence allows meaningful action without illusion. Imagine the leader once again at the tower's peak. The city sprawls below, choices infinite yet bounded by consequence. The chains of responsibility are invisible but real, pressing gently yet persistently. The paradox of power whispers a quiet truth. The more one controls, the less one may feel free. Autonomy is not guaranteed by influence. It is cultivated by wisdom, mindfulness, and measured use of authority. In life, ambition and power must coexist with awareness. Responsibility shapes the range of action, accountability defines the scope of choice, and freedom emerges from understanding the nature of constraint. The paradox endures as a meditation on authority, autonomy, and the subtle balance between capacity and liberty. Power is not liberation. It is responsibility, constraint, and influence intertwined. The art of leadership, mastery, and authority lies in recognizing these hidden limits, acting consciously within them, and cultivating a sense of freedom even when bound by consequence. The paradox teaches patience, reflection, and humility. The more you have, the more you must navigate responsibility. The more you influence, the more you must account for consequence. And in this tension, freedom is not absent, it is carefully and consciously preserved. Imagine a person standing at a crossroads. Options stretch out in every direction, each promising progress, each demanding choice. The pressure to act feels urgent, the need for decision overwhelming. Yet paradoxically, the wisest move may be inaction. By remaining still, by allowing events to unfold naturally, outcomes may improve beyond what effort could achieve. The paradox of action emerges. Sometimes doing nothing is the most effective course. This is not laziness or avoidance. It is strategic patience, an understanding of timing, context, and the subtle flow of circumstance. Action is not always the path to resolution. Stillness can be the catalyst for optimal results. The trap lies in assumption. We believe that action always leads to progress. We assume that effort, intervention, and decisiveness are inherently beneficial. Yet the paradox demonstrates that premature action can disrupt processes, provoke resistance, or close off better possibilities. Doing something can produce less favorable outcomes than allowing the natural course to continue. Logic and intuition conflict. Effort feels productive, yet it can produce friction, tension, and unintended consequences. The paradox challenges the assumption that motion equals improvement. Consider a gardener tending a delicate plant. Every adjustment, watering, trimming, relocating, seems necessary. Yet excessive interference stunts growth, weakens roots, and hinders development. Sometimes, stepping back and letting the plant find its own rhythm produces the healthiest result. In negotiation, acting too quickly can provoke counterproductive reactions. Silence or patience often invites cooperation, reflection, and creative solutions. Those who rush may close doors that inaction would have kept open. Even in personal life, the paradox appears. Overmanaging relationships, constantly seeking to influence outcomes, can generate tension and conflict. Allowing events to unfold, letting people and circumstances find their natural course, often produces richer, more harmonious results. The paradox is universal. Action is not inherently superior to inaction. Timing, context, and awareness determine effectiveness. The paradox of action illustrates the interplay between intervention and emergence. Systems, whether natural, social, or personal, possess inherent dynamics that sometimes respond better to observation than manipulation. Philosophically, the paradox aligns with the principle that restraint can be more potent than force. Doing nothing does not equate to doing nothing at all. It is an active form of wisdom, an understanding of the proper moment to engage. Action without awareness may disrupt flow. Inaction with awareness allows adaptation, observation, and the emergence of outcomes aligned with larger patterns. The paradox highlights that effort must be calibrated, responsive, and strategic, rather than reflexive or compulsive. The paradox resonates across domains. In governance, policies introduced prematurely or enforced aggressively often create instability. In economics, markets self-correct when left undisturbed, while over-intervention can trigger crisis. In leadership, stepping back allows teams to innovate, learn, and develop resilience. Even in personal decision-making, the paradox is evident. Rushing into action often produces regret, while patience and reflection yield more favorable outcomes. The apparent passivity of inaction conceals strategic engagement, a form of influence that unfolds through timing and observation. Power and intervention are inseparable from responsibility. Those who act must consider consequences not only of their deeds, but of restraint. Sometimes, the most decisive act is deliberate stillness. The paradox of action cannot be solved by acting more. The key lies in understanding context, flow, and timing. Recognizing when to intervene and when to refrain transforms potential outcomes. Inaction becomes an active choice, informed by observation, foresight, and patience. It is not surrender, but strategic alignment with circumstances. Doing nothing can create space for insight, adaptation, and the natural unfolding of events. The lesson is profound. Effectiveness is not measured solely by effort, but by the alignment of action with timing, awareness, and circumstance. Growth, resolution, and harmony often emerge when motion yields to stillness. The paradox reframes ambition and decisiveness. The wisest course is not always the busiest, the loudest, or the most immediate. Sometimes restraint, observation, and patience produce the deepest impact. Imagine the person at the crossroads once more. Options stretch out endlessly. The pressure to act is present, yet clarity emerges in the pause. The paradox of action whispers a quiet truth. Sometimes doing nothing achieves what action cannot. Stillness is not passivity. It is deliberate engagement with the rhythm of circumstance. Patience cultivates perspective, allows emergence, and nurtures optimal outcomes. In life, as in strategy, wisdom lies in discerning when to move and when to remain. Effectiveness grows not from constant motion, but from awareness, timing, and the courage to pause. The paradox endures as a meditation on decision, timing, and the subtle power of inaction. Doing nothing is sometimes the most powerful act, the quietest force, the most profound contribution. The art of action is the art of knowing when to step forward and when to step back. In the space between motion and stillness, the paradox reveals its power, teaching patience, discernment, and trust in the natural unfolding of life. Imagine standing in a vast hall filled with doors. Each doorway promises a different path, a different life, a different experience. At first glance, it seems liberation itself. The power to choose is absolute. Yet as options expand, the weight of decision grows. Each choice demands consideration. Each possibility carries consequence. The paradox of freedom emerges. Too many choices can feel like no freedom at all. In the abundance of possibility, indecision thrives. Autonomy becomes anxiety. Openness becomes burden. The very mechanism designed to liberate can confine. The trap is hidden in assumption. We believe that more options equal more freedom. We equate abundance with autonomy, opportunity with empowerment. Yet human perception has limits. Our minds struggle to evaluate, compare, and predict outcomes for innumerable paths. Excess creates paralysis, not liberation. The paradox challenges the simple notion that freedom is measured by quantity of choice. Logic and intuition clash. Greater variety should bring satisfaction. Instead, it often produces hesitation, doubt, and even regret. Consider a person shopping for a simple item. Rows upon rows of nearly identical products stretch into infinity. Comparison consumes thought, preferences conflict, decisions stall. What should have been a simple task becomes a source of tension. In careers, the paradox repeats. Opportunities abound, each promising growth and fulfillment. The more potential paths exist, the heavier the burden of selection. Fear of choosing poorly may freeze action entirely. Even in relationships, too many options can erode clarity. The mind calculates endlessly, weighing possibilities, imagining alternatives. Freedom becomes anxiety. Abundance becomes constraint. The paradox exists wherever choices multiply. Liberty is not proportional to quantity. It is mediated by the capacity to decide and commit. The paradox of freedom highlights the tension between opportunity and cognitive load. Human consciousness thrives on clarity, focus, and structure. Too many alternatives generate stress, uncertainty, and dissatisfaction. Philosophically, freedom is not merely the absence of constraint. It is the ability to make deliberate, meaningful choices without being overwhelmed. Excess freedom can invert itself into constraint. Autonomy collapses under the weight of endless potential. The paradox illustrates that more options do not guarantee more satisfaction. The mind has thresholds. Beyond them, liberty transforms into confusion. Choice becomes a trap when deliberation exceeds comprehension. In society, the paradox manifests in markets, politics, and education. Too many policy options can stall progress. Too many consumer products can overwhelm buyers. Too many paths of education or career options can paralyze decision-making. Even in personal life, the paradox is evident. Relationships, hobbies, and lifestyle choices multiply endlessly. Freedom, once empowering, becomes anxiety-laden. The tension between abundance and clarity extends to leadership and influence. Those in power must structure choices for others to prevent decision fatigue. Too much freedom without guidance can create constraint and stagnation. The paradox of freedom is not resolved by eliminating options. It is resolved by understanding the interplay between choice, comprehension, and action. Clarity, limits, and prioritization restore the sense of freedom. Deliberation becomes deliberate. Commitment becomes deliberate. Autonomy returns when the mind can navigate possibilities without overload. The lesson is subtle. Freedom is not a function of endless opportunity. It is a function of meaningful, manageable choice. Empowerment arises when decisions are intentional, boundaries are recognized, and possibilities are consciously engaged. The paradox reframes our understanding of liberty. True freedom lies not in the sheer number of paths, but in the ability to navigate them wisely. Imagine the person in the hall of doors once more. Countless pathways stretch endlessly, yet one becomes clear. Clarity emerges through focus, attention, and reflection. The paradox of freedom whispers a quiet truth. Too many choices can constrain. Abundance without discernment becomes a prison. Liberty exists not in excess, but in the art of selection, in the courage to commit, in the awareness of limits. In life, as in strategy, abundance is both opportunity and obstacle. Freedom is cultivated through focus, clarity, and thoughtful decision-making. Too many options may feel confining, yet mindful navigation transforms overwhelm into autonomy. The paradox endures as a meditation on choice, awareness, and the subtle nature of freedom. True liberty is measured not by the quantity of paths, but by the capacity to act decisively, intentionally, and with confidence. In the balance between possibility and clarity, the paradox reveals its lesson. Freedom is found not in endless options, but in wise engagement with what truly matters. Imagine a scholar seated before a vast library, the weight of knowledge pressing from every direction. The world is complex, layered, and ever-changing. Every question answered reveals new questions yet unknown. In this realm, the paradox of ignorance arises. Admitting what one does not know is not weakness. It is the doorway to understanding, the first step toward insight. Yet in a society that prizes certainty and confidence, acknowledging ignorance can feel risky. To speak honestly about what we do not know may invite doubt, criticism, or judgment. And yet, It is precisely this admission that opens the path to genuine learning. The trap lies in pride and perception. We assume knowledge equals competence. We believe that appearing informed signals wisdom. Yet the paradox challenges this assumption. Confidence without comprehension can mislead, while acknowledging limits fosters clarity and growth. The mind trapped in pretense is restricted from exploration. Only by confronting our ignorance can we expand understanding. Logic and intuition collide. To admit ignorance feels vulnerable, yet it strengthens intellectual resilience. The paradox highlights the tension between appearance and substance, between ego and learning. Consider a student learning a new discipline. Pretending to understand concepts beyond grasp leads to errors, missed opportunities, and stagnation. By openly acknowledging gaps in knowledge, the student invites guidance, discussion, and correction. Admitting ignorance transforms uncertainty into opportunity. In leadership, the paradox is equally evident. Leaders who claim certainty in all matters risk misjudgment. Leaders who admit limits encourage collaboration, uncover blind spots, and create space for collective intelligence. Recognition of what is unknown becomes a strategic advantage. Even in daily life, this paradox holds. When faced with complex decisions, admitting uncertainty allows reflection, consultation, and informed choices. Pretending to know constrains perception. Embracing ignorance expands it. The paradox repeats across time and culture. True wisdom begins with the simple, counterintuitive act of acknowledging what we do not know. The paradox of ignorance underscores the relationship between awareness and knowledge. Knowledge is not merely accumulation of facts, it is understanding of context, relationships, and nuance. Awareness of ignorance sharpens perception, cultivates curiosity, and refines judgment. Philosophically, this aligns with the ancient principle that wisdom begins in recognizing one's own limitations. Socrates' insight that he knew nothing is emblematic. Admitting ignorance is not passivity, it is active engagement with the unknown. By embracing uncertainty, the mind becomes open to evidence, reflection, and revision. Ignorance acknowledged is the seed of insight. The paradox teaches that the appearance of knowing is inferior to the courage to confront what is not yet understood. The paradox extends beyond individual growth. In science, breakthroughs often arise from questioning assumptions, challenging consensus, and admitting gaps in understanding. In governance, leaders who recognize limits of knowledge make more measured, adaptive decisions. In technology and innovation, acknowledging ignorance sparks inquiry and exploration, leading to progress. Even in interpersonal relationships, the principle applies. Listening without presumption, admitting what one does not know, fosters trust, understanding, and connection. The paradox of ignorance permeates all domains where growth and learning occur. Power, status, and expertise may tempt pretense. Yet the greatest influence often resides with those who embrace limits, seek counsel, and remain open to new perspectives. Knowledge emerges not from certainty, but from recognition of the unknown. The paradox of ignorance cannot be resolved by pretending to know. It is resolved by embracing humility, curiosity, and openness. Admitting ignorance is an act of courage and strategy. It transforms vulnerability into opportunity, limitation into exploration, and doubt into insight. Understanding arises from conscious recognition of what is not yet understood. The lesson is clear. Wisdom is not measured by the absence of questions, but by the willingness to confront them honestly. To admit what we do not know is to expand the realm of possibility, to invite dialogue, and to cultivate authentic understanding. The paradox reframes ambition and intellectual pursuit. Knowledge grows when curiosity triumphs over pride. Learning deepens when acknowledgement precedes certainty. Imagine the scholar in the vast library once more. Questions stretch endlessly across shelves in time. Each unanswered query is not failure, but invitation. The paradox of ignorance whispers a profound truth. Admitting what we do not know is the foundation of wisdom. Vulnerability becomes strength, uncertainty becomes clarity, and acknowledgement becomes the path to growth. In life, learning, and leadership, the paradox teaches patience, humility, and courage. To confront the unknown honestly is not defeat, but mastery. The more we recognize the limits of our knowledge, the more deeply we can understand. Ignorance embraced is wisdom cultivated. The paradox endures as a meditation on learning, humility, and the quiet power of admitting what we do not know. True insight begins not in knowing, but in courageously acknowledging the unknown and allowing it to guide discovery, reflection, and action. Imagine a person holding a small treasure, unsure whether to keep it or share it. The treasure represents time, energy, resources, or wealth. The natural instinct urges preservation, self-protection, security. Yet beyond this instinct lies the paradox of generosity. The more one gives, the more one experiences abundance. At first glance, this seems contradictory. Giving diminishes resources, yet paradoxically, it can expand fulfillment, meaning, and a sense of richness. The stakes are profound. Life presents countless opportunities to share, to offer, to extend beyond self-interest. The choice to give, especially in excess, challenges conventional logic and touches the essence of human experience. The trap is immediate and subtle. We assume that value is proportional to possession. What we keep defines our wealth. Loss diminishes security. Generosity seems costly, even dangerous. Yet the paradox contradicts this perception. By giving, one does not necessarily become poorer. Instead, giving opens doors to emotional, psychological, and spiritual richness that cannot be measured by material accumulation. The mind struggles to reconcile this. The act of relinquishing appears to reduce control, yet it paradoxically enhances satisfaction. The heart and intellect must navigate a tension between scarcity and abundance. Consider a neighbor lending time to someone in need. At first, the time seems lost, the schedule compressed, the effort unbalanced. Yet moments of connection, gratitude, and shared experience create a sense of wealth far greater than the minutes expended. A philanthropist donates resources to a cause. Materially, the wealth decreases. Psychologically, however, satisfaction, purpose, and meaning expand. The act of giving transforms perception. Scarcity becomes abundance. Even small acts, unnoticed by the world, demonstrate the paradox. A smile offered, a word of encouragement, a gesture of kindness, these do not diminish the giver. They generate an internal sense of richness, a quiet affirmation of human connection. The paradox applies across scales. Giving more can create fulfillment that transcends immediate measurement. Loss transforms into gain in a domain beyond the tangible. The paradox of generosity is rooted in the nature of value and human perception. We tend to measure wealth materially, yet true richness often arises from intangible domains. Generosity activates psychological and social mechanisms that enhance well-being. Acts of giving strengthen relationships, foster trust, and cultivate a sense of purpose. The brain responds to altruism with satisfaction, pleasure, and emotional reward. Philosophically, this aligns with the principle that fulfillment is not possession-dependent. Wealth is not solely a matter of accumulation, but of engagement, empathy, and contribution. The paradox teaches that diminishing what we hold can paradoxically increase what we experience. Giving becomes a multiplier rather than a subtractor. By extending resources outward, one invites growth inward. The act itself creates richness beyond the constraints of material reality. The paradox manifests in societies, organizations, and communities. Leaders who prioritize the well-being of others often cultivate loyalty, trust, and collective strength. Resource sharing, mentorship, and generosity in leadership yield benefits beyond immediate calculation. In economics, altruism may seem counterintuitive. Yet in practice, cooperative behavior produces stability, social capital, and mutual benefit. The paradox illustrates that human systems operate on principles beyond strict material logic. On a personal level, the paradox highlights the profound value of relationships. Time, attention, and care are forms of wealth that expand when shared. Power and influence increase not through hoarding, but through generosity. The paradox of generosity is resolved not by accumulation, but by perspective. Understanding that giving creates richness reframes decisions, priorities, and goals. Generosity is not a sacrifice, but an investment. The wealth gained is internal, relational, and enduring. The act of giving cultivates gratitude, satisfaction, and a sense of purpose that outlasts material gain. The lesson is subtle but transformative. Richness is not measured solely by what we keep, but by the quality and depth of what we share. Giving becomes a channel through which abundance flows, paradoxically increasing the giver's experience of wealth. Fulfillment arises from the understanding that personal enrichment and generosity are intertwined. The paradox invites reflection. To gain more, give more. The heart and mind are both rewarded by extension rather than accumulation. Imagine again the person holding the treasure. Instead of hoarding it, they offer it to another. The immediate quantity decreases, yet an invisible richness fills their being. Connection, purpose, and meaning grow in ways material measurement cannot capture. The paradox of generosity whispers a quiet truth: giving is not loss. It is transformation. Wealth is not solely possession, but experience. The act of sharing expands life beyond scarcity, revealing abundance in every gesture. Generosity becomes a pathway to internal richness. The paradox teaches that human fulfillment thrives not in accumulation, but in the courage to extend oneself to others. Giving more can indeed make you feel richer, and in this simple truth lies the profound rhythm of a generous life. True wealth is found not in keeping, but in the paradoxical liberation of giving, where what is shared returns multiplied in meaning, connection, and joy.